The program normally scheduled at this time will not be seen in order that we may bring you the following special broadcast.
Student activism and noisy dissent will not stop until its causes stop. As long as the war in Indochina continues with no end in sight, as long as there is repression of black, brown, and red people, as long as women are denied equal opportunity, as long as the desires and problems of working men and women are bypassed, as long as there is poverty in this country, as long as the United States continues on its collision path with its environment, students and young people will continue to make noise. Until these things are changed, we will continue to make life uncomfortable and at times unlivable for the men in positions of power and influence in this country. That I can promise you.
In a special one-hour broadcast, NET presents Crisis on the Campus. The highlights of today's hearings of the President's Commission on Campus Unrest. Now, NET correspondent David Prowett.
In the fall of 1969, almost 7 million students were attending some 2,300 colleges and universities in the United States. Nearly a quarter of these schools, an estimated 523, were hit by at least one incident of violent or disruptive protest during the academic year. Protests that culminated in the tragic deaths of 6 students at Kent State University in Ohio and Jackson State College in Mississippi. A month after the fatal shootings, the President named a special body to investigate the causes and possible cures of the escalating violence on the campus. Today, that group, the President's Commission on Campus Unrest, began its first set of public hearings in Washington. They opened with a statement by the Commission chairman, former Pennsylvania Governor William Scranton.
They're composed of very distinguished citizens with excellent reports, have studied the broad problems of disorder and violence in our country, and have made very valuable recommendations. This commission has a far more specific mandate in the special and important area, and we intend to come up with specific recommendations and deliver them before the opening of the current forthcoming school year, keeping the timetable that has been set by the President with reference to his specific desire. And we intend to finish this task before the beginning of the next school term.
Shortly after the hearings began, the Commission's possible effectiveness was challenged by National Student Association President Charles Palmer.
The frustration and disappointment on all campuses cannot be ignored this fall as it was last year at this time. The method used last year was to push the quiet year theory. The administration and other officials continually told us that campuses would not erupt and were not erupting. This failure to regard what was happening on campuses as important was an attempt to see if a problem would go away if ignored long enough. The quiet year gained credibility as press reports carried fewer accounts of student unrest, but it was a bootstrap operation. The scarcity of reports of campus unrest was due primarily to the reluctance of the press to report anything after administration attacks for drawing attention to discontent on campuses. But the theory could not be maintained as the year wore on for obvious reasons. I think that many students suspect that the quiet year theory may have been replaced with the commission plan. I think many students see this commission as a possible vehicle for change, but believe your recommendations will only be superficially followed, and that your report will join the Kerner and Eisenhower Commission statement on some dusty shelf.
The Commission on Campus Unrest is made up of a chairman and 8 members. In many ways, it's a unique group. In the first place, there are none of the familiar faces who usually sit on presidential commissions. These are all new people. Even Governor Scranton, a familiar face in the political world, hasn't been associated with this type of inquiry. The group is composed of 4 blacks and 5 whites, 8 men and 1 woman. The occupational mix is 2 law enforcement officials, 1 lawyer, 1 newspaper editor, 3 university presidents, and 1 recent school graduate. Governor Scranton introduced them this morning to the audience.
Beginning on my extreme right is Erwin Canham, whom you all know as the editor of the Christian Science Monitor. And the next is Dr. Cheek, who is the president of Howard University. And the next is General Davis, who is the director of public safety in Cleveland. And the next is Dr. Derthick, who is presently here with the Urban Institute, but her normal job is as a professor at Boston College. And on my direct right is Mr. Orteek, who is the just past president of the Bar Association. And the next is Joe Rhodes, who is a very distinguished person. As all of you know, he has been the undergraduate president at Caltech and is now a fellow at Harvard University. Jim, nice to see you, and good morning, sir. And just walked in is Chief Ahern, who is the chief of the police department in New Haven.
In a controversial preliminary report released earlier this month, FBI Director Herbert Hoover said that a total of 1,785 demonstrations took place on college campuses last school year. 462 injuries were reported during these protests: students, police, college officials. The report also cited a marked increase in property damage and arrests, and the fact that even now student committees have been formed on numerous college campuses to spend the summer planning further action for the coming fall term. This activity aimed at political support for non-administration candidates. No type of school has proven immune to demonstrations, violent or otherwise.
The whole thing, they all have to understand that until we govern ourselves where that is, appropriate, until students and faculty together govern this university where that's appropriate, which is everywhere, until that happens, they're going to have trouble.
Trouble. Most of it repeating in one way or another the demand for more freedom, less discrimination. All of it straining towards a confrontation, first with university officials and then the police. The tensions had spread to Orangeburg, South Carolina, and the State University, where controversy over discrimination in a bowling alley was enough. At the end, 3 people were dead. At Columbia University in New York, the battle was fierce, and the fashion for seizing buildings and officials came in. The acting dean was held for more than 24 hours, and the office of President Grayson Kirk was demolished. This time, the cause for protest was student fury at research projects devoted to the war effort and discrimination in the building of a gymnasium. The buildings were in student hands for 10 days before police finally cleaned up. This had been the largest and most dramatic incident of student destructiveness to date. Supporters of a hard line against student revolt felt they had a strong backer in the presence of S.I. Hayakawa, who had held on through Bloody Tuesday, December 4th of 1968, when more than 30 people were arrested and a dozen injured, as 450 police battled students in numerous skirmishes. Again, the causes were demand for establishment of ethnic studies, more minority group instructors, more minority group students. The 2 weeks of violence at San Francisco had been led by Students for a Democratic Society and the Black Student Union. With San Francisco and Berkeley still having trouble, new names were added to the list of campuses in chaos: Duke, Rutgers, Hunter, Brandeis, Swarthmore. But at Cornell, something new for student demonstrators was added: guns. Rifles in the hands of black students protesting a cross-burning in front of a Negro co-ed residence and demanding amnesty for 3 black demonstrators arrested earlier. Less than a month after Cornell, CCNY, City College of New York, literally came under fire. A fire of mysterious origin broke out in Finley Hall, burning it to the ground. Black and Puerto Rican students had demanded minority enrollment be increased. But the mood was changing. The hatred of the war in Vietnam that had colored most of recent demonstrations had taken over the students' passions and was now fast becoming the #1 issue in the area of campus unrest. At Kent State University in Ohio, May 4th, this year saw National Guardsmen marching on students, rifles loaded. Dissent had erupted to the final point of violence, and 4 students, out with a group protesting our intervention in Cambodia, fell beneath the gunfire. Then, within days, at Jackson State College in Mississippi, another shock. This time, 2 black youths were shot and killed by police during a night of violence outside a women's dormitory. The police said they had shot only after being attacked by sniper fire from an open window. How the violence had started was not clear, but its ending made clearer than ever the seriousness and the depth of our division and dissent. The portent for the future was ominous. The testimony today started out with leaders of the Senate taking part. Senate Majority Whip Edward Kennedy and Senate Minority Leader Hugh Scott. In his statement, Senator Scott called for an end to volatile rhetoric for both students and the establishment, called for a strong statement from an administration spokesman on the campus problem, and noted that dissent was not a new phenomenon on the campus. It had, he said, been around even when he was in school, although it was nonviolent then. He then went on to say that communication with today's students is vital and that they must be listened to.
The educational system, they do need more participation. The sad part of it is that if you create a new form of student-centered or student-faculty cooperation, apathy sets in, and after they get it, there's less tendency to use some of these means of cooperation. Now, a student at Temple, to quote that university again, said recently that students don't like to work within the committee system because when they go to the committees, unless they are angry and arrogant and contentious, they are going to be out-talked. This is a fear that their elders aren't going to listen to them. It's also a fear that they are not yet quite competent enough to engage in the reasoning process with their elders, a fear that they will be overcome by sophisticated subtleties of logic, and perhaps we need more logic and philosophy in the college courses, perhaps. But I do think all these doors should be open to them where they can participate before they are really ready to control.
If in fact what we've seen happening on the campuses in the last year, the gradual growth of a massive student movement, the polls indicate no longer is there an active and radical minority, but an outspoken and aroused majority of students are opposed to the administration's policies. Do you think, given the Cambodian invasion and the president's war policies, that any activities in Indochina are worth the dissolution of our society that's indicated by the events of the spring, and to all of our knowledge indicated will continue in the fall? That's my first question.
Well, Mr. Rhodes, I would have to respectfully challenge the premises there, because I do not believe that the values in our society are, I believe they are scarred, but I do not believe they are fatally damaged or inherently defeated by the war in Indochina. I do think that the war in Indochina is immoral, but in the same sense in which virtually all wars are immoral, that it is unpopular, that it should be terminated as fast as possible. But I think it is more fashionable than reasonable to argue that the cause of this summer of our discontent is directly related solely to the war. I think it was one of the springs that set it off. One wonders why it wasn't set off sooner, at a time when the war was growing rather than at a time when the war was lessening. And it might have been good for this country had this happened about 2 to 4 years ago. But obviously it disorders the priorities. Obviously it deters and detains the things that need to be done in this country. But I do not believe that we can ascribe all of our ills to this particular unfortunate situation.
Senator, what contribution do you think the national administration can make towards alleviating some of the concerns that students have today? Well,
the contribution of of concern, of attention, of listening, of an invitation for wider participation. And as you may know, this is not universally popular to say it, but at the White House today, there are probably more members of the Ripon Society than of any other organization. And, well, I am a centrist myself. I far prefer them to the intolerable arrogances of the far right, for example. The White House, in other words, if you go down there, is really peppered with attractive, thinking young men and women. We could have more of that in all of the government, and those who are the elders would do well to listen more to them. I think the President's action in naming this commission and recognizing people of different backgrounds, different ages, is indicative of their concern. You can never really listen enough, but certainly there ought to be more of it. And then, like all administrations, there is a lack of follow-through. Every president has commented at one time or another that, well, I give an order and then nothing happens. So this administration is not unusual. It gives orders too, and very frequently nothing happens. Sometimes that's true of their leaders. They give orders to us in the Congress, and then on malheureusement, nothing happens. It is a difficulty of the system, I think.
Could we get a little specific about the relationship of legislation to this problem? Would you tell us your views about pending legislation and other legislative proposals, what you think the Congress can do to help relieve the situation?
Well, obviously, no repressive legislation, obviously no sumptuary legislation designed to control people's behavior should be favored. Beyond that, I think we in this country expect too much of our laws and sometimes too little of the people who are responsible for administering them at all levels. I would not have specific legislative suggestions to make. I would think that we ought to leave the solution of these problems as far as we can to the colleges, referring now to student unrest, to the colleges, to the faculties, to intercommunity relations. I think that the administration can help by supporting continued research into imbalances in education, to discrimination in education, to the support of the educative process, as we are doing in the education bill, where both House and Senate have added funds above and beyond the administration request. But I believe we may be in a period where I would doubt that legislation per se touching on student unrest would be of very much use. The Commission may come forward with suggestions, but they do not occur to me.
Most of the witnesses were more able to detail causes of campus unrest than to suggest cures. The themes that kept running through the hearing were those of the unresponsiveness of the Congress to young people, a general malaise in the country, a lack of communication between the establishment institutions and students, and, of course, Vietnam. This was the one picked out by Senator Edward Kennedy as the primary reason for the increasing unease of the students.
The first and most important point is that we cannot treat the problem of campus unrest in isolation, divorced from its central relation to the war in Southeast Asia. It is no coincidence that the age of campus unrest coincides almost precisely with the escalation of American involvement in Vietnam. It is no coincidence that the killings at Kent State came hot on the heels of our invasion of Cambodia. I urge this commission not to back away from its own confrontation with the issue of the war. An analysis of campus unrest cannot look solely at the acts of students as disruptive and lawless. The analysis cannot omit Vietnam. It cannot ignore the central fact that the pressure of the war has eroded the faith of all of our citizens, and especially our young, and the ability of our government and institutions to do the things that must be done.
I don't think any sane person questions the relationship of the war in Southeast Asia to this problem. But would you think aloud for a minute what the situation would be on American campuses today if there had been no war in Southeast Asia?
I think that one of the principal points that I was trying to make in the first observation I made in the testimony is not so much that the war was undertaken, as unfortunate and tragic as it was, but that we've been unable to successfully conclude it. I think this is more the reasons for despair. I'm sure there would have, even if it had not, we hadn't been involved in Southeast Asia, I'm sure in terms of the restlessness of this generation, in terms of many of the problems that we face would be acute and severe. I don't think it would have been as nearly as intense as it currently is, because I do feel strongly that the failure to successfully conclude the war is the overriding and overwhelming concern and for the young. And perhaps if we did not and were not involved, then we would be better able and better equipped, certainly would be able to have a significant input in terms of resources to meet some of the overwhelming and overriding concerns that I think the younger generation and all Americans are concerned about, in terms of healing the misunderstandings between the races and meeting the problems of the cities and attending to the elderly and the other social problems which are so apparent in this country today.
While he stressed his understanding of the students' disillusionment over the war, Senator Kennedy also said he could not condone campus violence in protesting it.
Second point I would like to make is that although the war may explain the present atmosphere of campus unrest, it cannot condone the violence and various confrontation that have become the hallmark of too many campus demonstrations. No amount of deep concern or commitment to a cause can possibly justify the wanton acts we have seen on campuses across the country in recent weeks. This spring alone, professors have been violently assaulted at Connecticut, their homes vandalized at Wisconsin, manuscripts of their life's works destroyed at Stanford. ROTC buildings have been burned to the ground at Kent State and firebombed at Penn State. On many campuses, the very functioning of the university is made impossible by senseless acts and threats of violence. We know that some societies and institutions can be closed, or can be so closed and so repressive that change can never come except by the use of force. But this is not the case with the universities of America in 1970. No amount of impatience for faster change or frustration with existing policy can possibly justify the cruel violence and brutality we have seen on campuses in recent years. Violence cannot be condoned. It must be contained. There is no need whatever for anyone to resort to the path of the brick or the bomb.
Thank you, Senator. I was interested in many of the points you raised, Senator, one particularly, and that was the role of the university, which, as you well know, is a matter of basic contention at the moment. And you refer to the fact that there should be a revision of priorities and a greater interest there in the social problems of our day. How do we do this with or without politicizing, as the formula goes, the university, which, as you know, some students think we should do, have a politicized university, and yet most of the administrators are very much opposed to this, even those that you commend for their present activities in understanding student problems.
Well, I mean, this is really the point and the question that's being asked this commission, and it's obviously the key dilemma, which one of the key dilemmas which we're facing today. Having coming from a state that has a number of great universities, have been struck by the fact that until relatively recently, they've almost uniformly abdicated any kind of responsibility or involvement within the local community. I think this is of considerable concern to young people when they live in today in the dormitories or on the beautiful campuses such as Stanford University, and they see the extraordinary kinds of despair and poverty that exists in the community surrounding. They really wonder whether their university or their education how relevant it is to the current kinds of problems. And I was struck by, in talking to some of the students from Stanford, they came to talk to me, that a number of them much more wanted to live outside of obviously the campus itself, because they thought that this was such an artificial atmosphere. And they felt strongly that the university should become much more kind of involved in activities and social problems of the communities. Now, I think this can take a variety of different expressions. It can take an active participation in community problems which they're located in. They can take an expression of involvement on national events. Many of the academic teachers and professionals at MIT have been extremely active and interested in providing information to the Senate and the Congress and the whole question of ABM and MERV, and have been very interested and followed this closely. But I think that one of the great senses of frustration is the fact that although they've been interested in the problems of MERV and they're interested in the inner belt up there that might move through part of the MIT campus, that they really, until the inner belt was coming through the campus, they weren't really interested in the problems of housing in Cambridge.
Yeah.
And
well, you think we can, then. I agree with your thinking that we could, that colleges and universities could do more about the communities in which they live and social efforts therein, and I think a lot of them are beginning to try to do this. But somehow or other, we've got to be able to draw and be interested in having this in the curricula more so than is presently the case. But somehow they've got to be able to draw the line so this doesn't make them political weapons, so to speak, in our institutional establishment. Although some students disagree with that, as you know, they think it should be.
If politicizing the university is a matter of concern for government figures, it's a fact of life for many of the students involved. Charles Palmer is currently president of the National Student Association, which represents more than 500 student governments across the country. His basic theme is that dissent, political and otherwise, is not only a right of the student, but in a sense his duty. That the university is not just an institution of learning, but also has an integral responsibility to provide growth to students in the process of living and making a difference. Dissent then becomes a part of the learning process and a political weapon to be used with care, but to be used.
Take direct issue with the clear implication that the Nixon administration appears to make, that the problems on the campus will be solved by provision for orderly expression of dissent and mechanisms to control violence. This is a gross misunderstanding. The official belief that the problems of the university are caused by nothing more than the failure to undertake dissent properly. This anal preoccupation with the pursuit of proper channels to the exclusion of any consideration for the substantive merits of a proposal has caused more problems than you may realize. Dissent has causes. If this commission is to make any useful recommendations, it must address itself to the causes of dissent and disruption and not waste its time with a superficial treatment of the symptoms. I take specific issue with the President's use of the phrases orderly expression, improper interference, peaceful dissent. Let us be frank. School administrators and government officials generally define what is orderly. To them, orderly means pursuit of clogged and non-responsive channels, channels which are, of course, established by administrators and faculties, among whom the object of the game often appears to be lengthy delay to see if the impetus will dissipate before they must act. Orderly means something that makes no waves and therefore is something to be ignored. Orderly has rightfully become a code word among students that means dissent that is doomed by definition to failure.
Mr. Palmer, I was also struck by the amount of attention given in your statement to the conditions in the universities themselves which you think contribute to the phenomenon that we are discussing. And I certainly concur with you in that. A great deal of the blame is to be placed at the feet of the university itself. My question to you is, although you devote some lines to the general condition in the country as playing a role, how much of a role do you think the students' concern about national priorities and the quality of American life contributes to the problem that we are attempting to assess?
What I tried to say in an earlier part of my statement was that those are the causes. That's what motivates students to action. If it wasn't for that, if the society in general was hunky-dory for everyone, I guess, is the best way to say it, we wouldn't, I don't think that most of us would be involved in the kind of movement that we are right now. I think that one of the reasons I addressed my statement the way I did was that I really don't think that this commission has the power to change the war in Vietnam, or that it will have the power to create equal opportunity for everyone in this country, or that it will have the power to change the way in which we approach our environment. And I tried to address the things that you people are thinking are important. The things I think are important, and were I to talk about, the highest priority items, I mean, I would obviously have to talk about the war, about the repression of certain people in this country, black people and Chicano people and things like that, as high priorities for me. And that's what motivates. That's what, if I were speaking to the president about how he should stop student unrest against really what is directed mostly against the government officials, I think, much more than it is against university officials, because that's who we're trying to get at. I mean, obviously, I would say, you want to see students, you want to meet what we're doing, then you can't just address yourself to procedures, and you can't just address yourself to due process and orderly dissent and these kinds of things. Because you have, one of the reasons that we go beyond the law sometimes is that we're ignored. That's the reason that people have traditionally been involved in civil disobedience in this country and around the world, is that it is impossible through normal channels to have influence. And that's why, we become involved, the 500,000 people came to Washington to protest the war, that there were as many people as there were at New Haven to protest the situation there, all those kinds of things. I mean, I think that's where it's at. If you're talking about pulling this country back together, it's trying to get rid of those kinds of issues that are dividing us.
And my last question reveals my pessimism, I guess, and skepticism based on my surprise to the Cambodian invasion. I never expected it. In the same sense, I guess I'm getting concerned about all the talk in the media and by the administration about the Middle East. What do you think would be the impact on the student community if we were to rapidly escalate our military involvement there?
I think that, and I don't make this as a threat, I make it more as an observation, because in some ways I don't think it may be the most effective way of opposing that kind of action. But I think just as in Cambodia, where the straight, sort of middle America kind of students reacted with their guts about that. And I really, that's something, again, a lot of people don't understand. The strongest, the hardest, the most, in some ways, most potentially violent reaction during the Cambodian crisis came from the straight kids who had never been involved in political activity before. They were the ones that felt most betrayed. They were the ones that felt that they had been let down on promises. And they were the people that moved to action. I think those people and more will move to action this time. And I think people will begin to say, you know, there is just no way we can believe what people say anymore. And I have to admit with you that I really feel the same. I feel the same pessimism. I think that there is potential for that kind of action happening, and I think students that there are many people that are thinking about that. But I just don't know that even though we sense that it may be coming, I don't know that there are going to be people that even those of us that sense that are going to be able to control our emotions at that point. It'll be a very difficult kind of thing.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Palmer, I have a couple of questions. The first one is just for purposes of clarification. In the next to the last sentence of your statement, you have said, until these things are changed, we will continue to make life uncomfortable and at times unlivable for the men in positions of power and influence in this country. Would you explain what you mean by the word unlivable?
I certainly don't mean that we are going to take lives away from people. I mean that there are people, obviously, who have influence in this country. And by unlivable, I mean we are going to make them face the issue. We're not going to let, I mean, we will continue to press, and I think most of us are committed, you know, wholeheartedly and in every way we can to a nonviolent way of doing that. But we will continue to press, and that may mean not allowing people to, I say not allowing, but that may mean following people places and hounding them and doing things. In some ways, I suppose many of the congressmen who were hounded by students after the Cambodian invasion felt that their life in some ways was made unlivable. And in that sense of the word,
this is not an assassination threat.
Oh, no, it is certainly not an assassination threat.
I apologize for asking the question.
No,
but
I'm glad you asked it, because I'm sure that there are people that would have interpreted it.
It's a word that can be read literally as well as figuratively, and you've explained it very clearly.
Palmer was asked repeatedly by members of the commission to give them specific recommendations that would alleviate campus tensions. None was forthcoming. During the afternoon session, two distinguished college presidents shared their views with the commission, Dr. S.I. Hayakawa of San Francisco State College and Dr. Robin Fleming, president of the University of Michigan. As all the witnesses agreed, the causes of campus unrest are many, complex, and all interlocking. Each had his own idea of which factors were most important. Dr. Fleming had these, among others.
The president of an institution is chargeable with the ultimate responsibility for the day-to-day operations of a campus, but he has responsibility to a great many constituencies, and of course these constituencies are often in very serious disagreement. The students, for instance, are very reluctant to recognize the fact that their education is heavily subsidized and that they simply cannot continually alienate the public in the form of the taxpayers or donors without having those people withdraw the support which they're giving to education. On the other hand, the public, which gets antagonized by the tactics of some young people, too often want to exert pressure and punishment on all. And this polarizes the camps. It is, of course, exacerbated by the fact that on every large campus, we do have a small but violent radical group. They may be students, they may be non-students, they may be both. They're utterly totalitarian, they're not touchable by reason. Some of them have severe psychiatric problems. Suspension or expulsion from school does not resolve the problem because they usually stay in the community. And they not only do not care that they alienate the public, they rather like to alienate the public because this contributes to tearing down the institution, which they believe in many cases must be done. They will often actively work to provoke police actions because they know that in that kind of a situation, almost certainly some relatively innocent person is going to be hurt, and that will in turn cause a reaction against the university and against the police. On the other hand, you have that extreme group in the public that believes that the only way to deal with these things is by force, including, if necessary, live ammunition. They don't seem to realize that this almost certainly will do far more harm than good, that it will take the great mass of moderate students and throw them into the arms of the radicals, which is exactly where the latter would like them to be. I would not complete my area of this without saying that certainly some segments of the press and the broadcast media have done very great damage at the universities. I well remember that the first major sit-in that I ever had to deal with had to continue 2 days beyond the time when it could have been stopped because the leaders told me quite candidly that one of the national networks could not be there for 2 days more, and it was necessary for them to keep it going in order to get the kind of national publicity which they wanted on that occasion. All of us who are administrators have had, I suppose, the experience of what some of us call confrontation by appointment. That's the sort of situation in which the student leaders first call the TV people and find out if they'll be available at X period, and if that would be a convenient time to have a confrontation so that it can be well pictured. Some of us who deal with these see an astonishing difference in the conversation before the lights turn on and after they turn on, and it might be amusing if it didn't convey such a false impression of what's really going on. There are certainly politicians who are exploiting unrest. They realize that there is hostility in the public towards higher education, that it is in many ways a popular political subject, and they exploit it, and this in turn further polarizes the constituencies and makes it more difficult for those of us who have to deal with it.
Dr. Fleming, we just heard from Mr. Palmer, the president of the National Students Association. In his statement, formal statement, he devoted considerable time and space to internal administration within universities. And I'm certain that excluding the University of Michigan, there have been some problems of internal administration of which Mr. Palmer speaks. Would you care to comment, please, upon the emphasis that Mr. Palmer places on this particular aspect of the problem in our universities?
Well, I did not hear Mr. Palmer testify this morning. I was here very near the end, but I didn't hear what he said, and so I'm not fully sure of what he said. I do know Mr. Palmer, and he, like Mr. Rhodes and I, all served on this other committee together, so I have heard some of his views before. And one could include the University of Michigan, certainly, in his views about this. There is no doubt that there is a great desire on the part of students to have a greater opportunity to participate in both the governance of the university and in the setting of curriculum, in the potentiality for controlling their own lives, less of the in loco parentis kind of doctrine, more possibilities for joining in the widespread participation within the university. I don't think myself that that has the same importance that Mr. Palmer thinks it has, but I think it is more important than some of my academic friends think it is, so I'm somewhere in the middle on that. I do believe that students ought to have much more widespread opportunities to participate. I don't believe that in certain areas they should have a controlling kind of vote, because I think there are certain areas in which it's clear that the expertise of faculty and the experience of faculty is more important and more relevant. But I would support, and in many, many ways at the university, we do have great participation in these things.
Pardon the intrusion, what are those areas?
That we now have?
No, that you don't think the students have...
well, I don't think, for instance, with respect to the hiring of faculty, that is primarily a job for students. I would I would disagree with many of my academic colleagues in the sense that I would let them participate in it, because I believe they have a valuable input into it. I would let them participate in the evaluation of faculty members and in the question of whether they are promoted, for instance. But I would not let them have the controlling vote in those areas. For one thing, the student population is a too transient kind of thing. I know they resent that when you say that to them, but it's true. It is a transient kind of force. And when one lives around a university, as all of us do, you see that from year to year, because I just give you one experience. I 2 years ago had a group of students come in and ask me to give them some support out of some funds that we maintain for this purpose in the President's office to help them with an evaluation of faculty in their teaching. And I've always favored that and thought it was a good idea, and so I talked with them about it, and I said, now just let me offer one comment, because I'm going to support this, and I think you ought to do it. But let me tell you that my experience is that a group like yours will get all interested in this and excited about it, and you'll do it, but then it will die, because you'll all move on and the other group won't be interested. No, that wouldn't happen in this case. They had this all planned out, and they had a built-in carryover. And they worked very hard on it, and they did a good job, and they published a booklet at the end of the year. The following fall, the carryover group came in to see me, and I said, this is fine. You're now going to carry on. No, they said, we have a new idea about how to do this now. This year, we're going to computerize it. We're going to do it on an entirely different basis. Well, and so they did do it on a different basis. And again, I think they did a useful project, and they are carrying that on. But the point I'm making is that you do get a different group each year, and they do have different ideas. And it's hard to maintain the stability of an operation if you're going to change your ideas almost every year about how you do it.
Dr. Fleming did offer 3 things that could be done to ease campus unrest. The first, an unwavering, completely credible commitment by the government to end the war in Vietnam. The second, special state and federal financial assistance to minority group members to allow them more access to higher education. And the third, an image overhaul of the 2 major political parties to give young people confidence that things can be changed inside the system. Dr. S.I. Hayakawa, the world-famed semanticist, became president of San Francisco State College when that school was paralyzed by violence. He managed to quiet the school by using extensive police force, and it stayed quiet for the past year. Dr. Hayakawa suggested one cause of campus unrest is that many young students are victims of a diploma-mad society, and in reality are involuntary and helpless captives of the educational system.
We must listen to the young people. They are the best and brightest of their generation. They have something to tell us, cry their sentimental apologists. Well, I would agree, but the message I hear is not the same as that which others purport to hear. They're saying clearly and unmistakably, we want out. We're tired of being treated as children. We're tired of preparing for life. We want to tackle real problems, not classroom exercises. And if we can't leave school without being drafted, then we want to reconstitute the universities until they're just like the outside world, with pressure groups, power politics, intimidation, graft, and guerrilla warfare. We're tired of being in a playpen. So the disruptive activists do have a point. To them, a college is indeed a playpen, and it has to be made real. It would be doing them a real favor to expel them, since they clearly don't want the sheltered scholarly environment of a university. However, by the curious logic of at least an influential portion of college faculty nowadays, you can't expel them, because to expel them is to make them liable to the draft, which would send them to Vietnam, where they'd be killed. So expulsion is equal to a death sentence. But the nonviolent, non-disruptive majority of our student bodies also have a point. To them, the college, far from being a playpen, is indeed a place for serious work in preparation for becoming a teacher, a lawyer, an engineer, a scientist, a poet, a businessman. And they don't want the campus reconstituted. So it seems to me what we need for young men and women in America today are two different kinds of things. First of all All who want higher education and cannot now get it should be given the chance to get it. And secondly, this applies especially to the upper middle class. All who don't want higher education or are not sure they want it should have the freedom to postpone college or not to go to college at all. A freedom that is not now felt to exist because of the draft. Now, the educational problems of the poor and the underprivileged are being worked upon. At least they are a center of a lot of attention, with the expansion of junior colleges and community colleges throughout the nation, the recruitment of minority students, financial aid programs, and the like. But the problem of the captive student is ignored. What can be done for him? First, I believe draft deferments for college students should be stopped at once. We must first place young men of all income levels on the same basis. Illustrative of this fact is the fact that departments of English, for example, are full nowadays of young men who have no interest in literature, divinity schools of young men who have no intention of becoming ministers. They're merely avoiding the draft, and many of them are ready to abandon their studies at the drop of a brick. Instead of the draft, therefore, with all its built-in inequities and chanciness, I should like to see a program of compulsory national service for all young men and women from the age of 18 onward. The service can last for 2 or 3 years. The service can be civilian or military at the option of the individual.
What you say is tantamount to saying that the people who are engaged in dissent are engaged in dissent not out of a deep sense of its wrong or its injustice or whatever, but out of a sort of a flippant, capricious, frustration over their courses and over the fact that they are abstract. Now, my question is, that is a terribly serious charge to make in this day when people are being shot for what they do. So, my question to you, and bayoneted, my question to you is, if you mean that, would you repeat it clearly? Because I think this inference is damaging.
Well, I think I mean it, although I don't want to put it in the same evaluative terms that you used. But to quote somebody that I don't often agree with, Mr. Jerry Rubin is said to have said, if we didn't have a war in Vietnam, we'd have had to invent it. That he was going to have his revolution anyway. And I think there's truth in this to this degree, that much of the cause of student unrest is more psychological than it is a response to actual events. However much those actual events need to be responded to, there is an important psychological component in that unrest. And this is what I'm trying to point out in my presentation, Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you.
Yes. Dr. Hayakawa, let me say first that I've, for a long time, had much interest in a program for national service and believe it well worth very thoughtful consideration. But I'd like to bring the discussion back to the present situation. You have told us that you think that a great deal of the friction on campuses is caused by students who are bored. You actually also say in the next sentence that it is the bright students who are the principal troublemakers. Namely, that it's the bright students who are bored and who are making trouble. My question's a little like Mr. Rhodes. Are you suggesting that these bright students shouldn't be in college or university? That the intellectually alert ones are the ones who ought not to be there? And if this is the case, whose fault is that? Is it the fault of the students or the fault of the university?
I think it is the fault of the prevailing middle class expectation that everyone's got to have a college education. I think that brightness, when I say it's the bright students who are among the principal troublemakers, I simply quote a very great authority on the subject, Kenneth Keniston of Yale, who's completely sympathetic with them, but he says that the people
Does he say they're bored?
No, he said they were the leaders of campus uproar, and they're also very, very, very bright.
Well, my point was that you say they're also bored.
Yes. That's my personal observation, sir. All right, but I want to say this. I don't say that they shouldn't be in college. What I'm suggesting, and I have abundant evidence from many of my students and many of my colleagues, that those who take 2 or 3 or more years out between high school and college profit more from college when they finally get there. And so I'm making no suggestion that bright students be kept out of college, except perhaps temporarily, while they mature in ways other than verbal wisdom.
One witness who agreed completely with Dr. Hayakawa's statement about the differing problems of black students was Otis Cochran, a Yale University law student who's now president of the Black American Law Student Association.
Black and white dissenters in the country did not adopt more radical views by choice, ladies and gentlemen. It was only after the repeated failures of the passive, nonviolent strategy, often identified with the late Dr. Martin Luther King, that dissenters were forced to adopt different theories of dissent. The advocates of violence, however, do continue to have and be a limited element among dissenting groups. Many advocates of violence, of course, remain, but in general, the policy of black brinkmanship has been tempered by caution, and uncontrolled or spontaneous violence has been spurned as an anachronism. The power and influence of black militants and revolutionaries, however, should not be underestimated, for it has been their ideas and programs which have set the tone for and identified the limits of almost every black and white radical response of recent years. The vilification and physical devastation unleashed upon them by the pillars of American society during the past few months attest to the importance they are conceded to have by those men. Yet, as important as their overtly political role is and continues to be, their role in evolving the idea of black community in its social and cultural dimensions has been of greater importance. The alternatives they have offered in terms of acceptable lifestyles for black people have disproved once and for all E. Franklin Frazier's thesis that the dominant social goal motivating most black people is the uncritical acceptance of the white bourgeois standards of respectability and success.
And so the first day of public hearings of the President's Commission on Campus Unrest ended. We'll be back tomorrow night at this same time with a summary of the second day. Among the witnesses scheduled to testify tomorrow are Jerry Wilson, Chief of Police in the District of Columbia, and Steve Kellman, a former Harvard student and author of the book Push Comes to Shove. This is David Prowett in Washington. Good night.
Crisis on the Campus was a production of National Educational Television.
This is NET, National Educational Television.
Distribution of the preceding program was a service of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The program normally scheduled at this time will not be seen in order that we may bring you the following special broadcast.
Society only moves when it's threatened, and I really don't even know why I'm telling you this, because I'm sure you know this. You're all in some sense in decision-making positions. You know that it's very hard to bring about change, but under the gun or with a gun to your head, you move a lot quicker.
Example is given of the alleged positive effects of violence in the ghetto. Of riots in the nation's ghettos. I look at what's happened since the riots in the ghettos. I don't see the slums having been torn down and replaced by decent housing. I don't see attempts being made to find jobs for the jobless, to improve our educational system. I see instead reaction to the riots in the ghetto leading to contributing to the election of a conservative administration which has increased the unemployment rate and which is doing virtually nothing about the problems of the ghetto.
Propose that this meeting declare Harvard University on strike.
We are going to put this university in a trick bag that will blow your mind.
I call for an end to minority tyranny on the nation's campuses.
Also have a demand. Read the demand.
In a special one-hour broadcast, NET presents Crisis on the Campus. Highlights of the second day's hearings of the President's Commission on Campus Unrest. Now, NET correspondent David Prowett.
This was the second day of hearings for the President's Commission on Campus Unrest. It was highlighted by the opposing testimony of two student representatives over the justice, relevance, and motives of current student protest. The 9-member commission, headed by former Pennsylvania Governor William Scranton, heard students described as frustrated, fed up, and ready to explode again in the fall. Later, these same young people were characterized as bored, snobbish, arrogant, and unconcerned with the rights and desires of the majority. In other words, the testimony today offered a microcosm of the tremendous polarization that's splitting the campus and the country today. The first witness to appear was Miss Eva Jefferson, president of the student body at Northwestern University. Despite her school's record of avoiding violence, she took a militant stand before the commission, saying often violence was the only way students could get attention. She was followed later by Steve Kelman, a recent graduate of Harvard University. He's national president of the Young People's Socialist League and the author of a book, Push Comes to Shove, an articulate indictment of campus protest.
What you have on the college campuses are basically two sets of people, two types of people. Those who believe that the system is okay, basically, and it's just we need the right people, the working through the system people, and some days I'm in that group. Then you have the people who think the system is all wrong and you just got to off the system, off the way we have democracy now, off capitalism, and some days I'm in that group. It depends who I talk to. And very seriously, a lot of kids are caught in a bag. Like, that's why the campuses went up so much in May. You got people who are really sitting on the fence. They really want to believe, and I seriously believe this, they want to believe that our Constitution stands for justice. They want to believe that democracy is a hip thing, and if it was just everywhere in the world, everything would be groovy. They want to believe that if we just got out Nixon and got in someone good, things would be okay too. But they have this nagging doubt in the back of their heads that people like SDS and other radical people have known or felt for years, that it's not the system, that it doesn't really make any difference who you plug into the different positions, because the end result's going to be exactly the same.
At the Harvard commencement this past June, I was struck by the sight of a graduating senior who participated in the procession carrying a Viet Cong flag, which he kept aloft throughout the entire ceremony. During the ceremony, nobody made any attempt to stop him. And next to the student holding the Viet Cong flag stood a friend of his, handing out a printed flyer with the word repression emblazed at the top. The universities of America and Western Europe remain, in my opinion, by and large, the freest institutions in human history. That they are imperfect, nobody can deny. But their imperfections clearly do not cause, much less justify, the forays that have been launched against them. The list of so-called crimes which student revolutionaries drum up against universities to provide excuses for campus violence bear all the marks of makeshift hatchet jobs, which can be accepted only by the most gullible. The problems of the campus do not originate, nor can they be solved on the campus. Students who feel despair and resentment with American society take out these feelings on the object closest at hand, their university.
When Ms. Jefferson entered the hearing room in the new Senate office building, she was followed quickly by an entourage of young people who filled up the available seats to listen to her testimony. She didn't fail them. Her formal statement began by chiding the commission for just adding more words to a subject already overflowing with verbiage. She told them if they and the establishment didn't understand the concerns of students by now, they probably never would. Nevertheless, she did explain her position at length and offered some radical suggestions on how to quiet the campuses.
What do? You know? And I don't have any simple answers. I don't have, you know, well, if you tell the president to do this, 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 and this, everything's going to be mellow on the campuses next fall. I do have a couple of things that would do that. One would be to reactivate those detention camps that I think President Nixon was instrumental in getting passed through under the Internal Security Act, and maybe round up everybody who's ever been in a demonstration, who has ever bought a radical newspaper, who's ever smoked dope, kind of put them in these camps or exterminate them or something, and then just kind of put so much fear in everybody's mind that nobody's going to move. That's one way of doing it. And I hope you don't take me to be facetious when I say this, because when I hear Agnew saying his, you know, we must isolate the bad apples, you know, it doesn't take someone with a college education to understand what that means. And, you know, who's a bad apple? You know, if you have dark skin, are you a bad apple? I don't know. If you smoke dope, are you a bad apple? I'm trying to say that this is a possibility, and you're going to have to deal with that, and you're going to have to address yourself to that point. And if you make a recommendation, I pray to God, if there, you know, that you make a recommendation that this not be implemented. Are you going to lead a drive to impeach Nixon? That could be one of your recommendations, and impeach everybody in the government who, I think, but see, the problem goes way, way beyond Nixon, because you're going to have to go down to like the mayors of little towns of like 50 people whose heads are in the wrong places too, which is why that's not going to be a good recommendation. It's so all pervasive. It's everywhere. Are you going to have some kind of a miracle drug that all of a sudden makes people dig each other and makes people want to accept other people as fellow human beings and things like that? Wow, if you could do that, that would be great, but I guess we can't. I don't know, you people are in a really bad position. I don't envy you at all, because what you, in a sense, have to do is propose some kind of a solution to the nation's problems. You really do, because that's what college protest is all about. It's not about, you know, having girls in your dorm at night, or smoking dope, or about we don't like our college president. It goes really deep to what everybody in some sense is saying about America. It goes to the guys who I saw on television last night who are wondering about inflation. You know, why do we have inflation? Does the war relate to that? Does our government spending relate to that? It goes to deep to what's at the heart of this country. And you have to address that. And to address anything short of that is going to be a cop-out for all of you. And I have a feeling that you're not going to do that. The final thing I guess I can say is that President Nixon, and I said this before, has done more to actively fill the ranks of the weathermen than any weatherman in the country. By his policies and by his ways of not reacting to problems, or to reacting to them badly, or to kind of saying, well, those people in the minority, and I can get reelected without them, the way he did to black people and to other people in this country. See, by doing these kinds of things, he radicalizes people. By having commissions like this that come up with really dynamite statements and really, really good conclusions, and by having no one respond to that, you in a sense are going to radicalize people. Not because maybe you want to, but because that's what's going to happen. People are going to see more and more that they can't get anything done through the system, that the system is ludicrous, and that the only way the system is either going to move, if you still believe that we should keep democracy, is to blow up buildings, to kill policemen, to cause violence. That's one way. Or to completely get rid of the system and bring about a revolution. And you people have got to address yourselves to that. And, you know, I don't envy you at all, but good luck.
Thank you, Ms. Dix. What would you think should be the structural setup of a given university? I know they might differ, but just generally.
Okay, I guess I've been indoctrinated really well by the system. I really believe in democracy. We have a really funny situation at Northwestern, and it's a private institution, and it's run by the Board of Trustees. And I'm in a very interesting position, and I wish I could start screaming about a personal problem there about our president, but we don't have one. And we had a committee composed of Trustees, alumni, no administrators except the president sat in and listened, our acting chancellor president, faculty and students. Now, this is a good arrangement, I think. You know, you have everyone represented. I would agree that the administrators should have a say in how the university is run. However, everyone agreed on one candidate except the 2 undergraduate students who were violently opposed to him. This person I anticipate will be appointed on Monday. Okay? Now, how I would have seen this working as a model is that committee would have had to have not unanimity, because you can never get that, and that's what the chairman keeps telling us. But you don't try to go around unanimity by avoiding 6,000 people in a school. And what you should have are models like this, like the administration completely determines the budget, and we all know that money determines what the university is going to be like. They determine the admissions policies. They determine who's going to come in. The faculty determines, you know, they're kind of self-perpetuating. What you need are models representing all the segments of the university community, and these people have to have, like, they have say, and they have the control, not an advisory position. Like, you people should have the control over, in a sense, if you were elected, should have the control over what happens on college protests, let's say, for an example. And this presidential committee should have had, I'm talking about, should have had a say on who was appointed. Yet, even worse than the fact that this guy's going to be appointed is that we just made a recommendation up to the Board of Trustees, who have the final say. These guys are businessmen. They're totally out of touch with what's going on. They may come to the football games, but I think the school goes a little beyond that. And I didn't mean to be so long-winded, but what you have to do is get every segment represented on things that affect them. And I don't mean to say that the administrators should have a say over what goes on in the dorms, because that does not affect them. But since the budget affects students, then we should have a say there.
By the way, it was Northwestern University's president who resigned recently because of student disorders. Ms. Jefferson continued to emphasize the need for action and not more words, reflecting the growing impatience of many of her colleagues with what they view as a seemingly endless series of bureaucratic roadblocks. Throughout Ms. Jefferson's sometimes eloquent, sometimes disarmingly frank testimony, there was a consistent current of urgency, of a need for immediate solutions if the students were to be satisfied, a timetable that has never been reflected in the history of American social change.
Also an ancient proverb which says that the best is the enemy of the good. Is there any responsiveness in student thinking?
What?
The best is the enemy of the good is the proverb. Namely, when you try to do too much, you fall flat. You have to move forward one step at a time. Is there any kind of bridge between student thinking and the rest of the populace by which we can move a step at a time rather than destroying everything in advance?
See, that philosophy just bothers me, because, see, every time I'm in a situation where I'm with adults or with people who are not within the universities, they say, well, things take time, you know, it could take 20 years to get this done. And the thing that's wrong with that is we know it doesn't. We got a man to the moon in how many years? 10 years? You know, because there was a national will to do that. How can anyone possibly say take time to do things? You may be, by saying take 10 years, you may be dooming some black child born in a ghetto to a life where he's so far alienated to everything, he's never going to really have a chance to be everything that he could have been. You're saying take one step at a time means that some person in Vietnam is just going to be killed tomorrow because the war is going to go on until Friday. We as people in a somewhat comfortable position have the luxury, and it is a luxury, of saying things take time. But what's really so great about what's happening on the colleges is people who do have that luxury are saying, no, we do not have time. You know, if you read any of the ecological statements, they say we're killing our earth. The earth's going to be dead in a matter of years. Just something as apolitical as that. What about all these social things, all these people who, by our inaction, we're totally warping their perspective of reality, in a sense? Or maybe ours is warped and they really know what's happening. We don't have the luxury of waiting. We really don't. And that attitude is always the attitude of those who can wait, and who really aren't under the gun.
Well, just in fairness, I would like to say that I'm not making an argument for delay or for cop-out. I'm making an argument for starting, and starting in the most practical possible way.
But how many starts do we need?
Just one.
But once again, is it going to be an event? Is it going to be, today we're going to start to make America a good place? It seems to me people have written articles, have written books, have talked to commissions and proposed ways of doing it, and nobody wants to do it. Little things have started all around the country, but nothing is falling into place.
This might be a good day to start.
Right on. Yes.
Sir, I'm sorry, but when we have a witness here, we have to... Sir, we would be delighted to have you come and meet with us at some other time, but we cannot interfere with a regular performance.
Wait just a second. This is what's, in a sense, wrong. Why can't he come up?
We would be delighted to hear from him in the regular sequence, but...
And it will give you a foundation to be able to relate to the lack of communication that you have.
Come up and make your 2 or 3 points, sir.
Thank you ever so much. Black is not of color. Black is love. The black revolution means a love revolution. It means all of us combined together trying to find, that's why you're here now, trying to find some format. We need this, brothers. We need this. My man here is sweating, trying to take things down. What she's saying, she's right, but she didn't have the deftness to give you. Well, I have it to give you. Number one, I started giving it to you from Watts, when we were out there with the Watts riot. Yes, I was there. You'll find me in the jail over there at Highland Park, a jailhouse in Michigan, when the Detroit riot was in Michigan. Yes, I was there as someone trying to bring the grievances to the nation. There are colleagues of mine all over the world, colleagues of yours all over the world, who are trying to do the same thing. Actually, all we're trying to do, see, I care. That's why that I am of 2 commodities, love and truth. That's why I'm here, because of love. Now, if I'm only dealing in truth, I'd separate from you. But I love. Now, the necessity for things to happen, number one, we got to get away from the materialistic of society. We've got to leave material values. We have to work from a vibration of each other. We have to coordinate with each other. Let material values uphold that. We need each other. We can't do without each other. But this is why love must come into being. And when you have love and truth, which is the opposite that what has subdued us in the past, which is white supremacy, which was built on lie, deceitfulness, greed. These things were in the past. Now the black revolution, which is in the future, which white faces are still a part of, is one derived from love, truth, understanding, tolerance. Then you got freedom. Then you got justice. Then you got peace. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Are there any other questions of Ms. Jefferson?
Yes. Go ahead. I yield to you. Ms. Jefferson, you made a statement in which you indicated that nobody believes in equal justice under law. I think I don't disagree with you. I think it's a terrible indictment of our system, and I certainly think that if this is what large groups of young people are concluding, then we are in deep trouble. And I would like to know if you have talked with other student leaders like yourself, and is this fundamental principle of democracy now being downgraded in the minds of young people?
I'd have to address that from 2 points, a spectacular example and then just little examples that I have. And the spectacular example was a conspiracy trial. And a lot of people said, oh, this is an aberration of American justice. Well, if it was, it would have been stopped by someone. I think the U.S. government has some power to deal with things like this. the contempt charges, just the whole thing. I don't even need to start on that, but just that could go on, and that we're going to go through the shams of saying, well, the system works because that awful decision can be appealed up and overturned. First of all, people all across the country thought that was a really great thing, including lawyers, not just people who are, quote, uninformed, but people who were lawyers thought what Hoffman did was really great. But then, okay, that's grandiose and that's very political, and we can see why that might have been done. But I worked for a little while with the Legal Aid Society, worked with some people there in Evanston. Black people, for one example, and poor people have the worst lawyers in the entire world if they can't afford a good one. Instead of looking for the best people to be the defense or public attorneys, they find people who can't do other things or who don't want to do other things, or they don't give them lawyers at all. And these people just, of course they're going to get rotten justice. You know, the whole thing that the Black Panthers are into, what does a jury by your peers mean? There's a very serious question if a rich person could really judge a poor person's motives, if a white person could really judge a black person's motives. This whole thing, kind of like the stuff on paper is really groovy, but put into practice, it just doesn't work out. And the whole way that I was talking to some people who were into insurance law, and they say that the 70% of the claims taken by people go directly to the lawyers. You know, paying the people who get their money for whiplash have to pay their lawyers for all sorts of things like this. Just, it's all up and down, from the political aspect to how the law is not equal to just the day-by-day thing.
Why do you think so many Americans have such a low opinion of students? If what you say represents students' attitudes, why do you think so many people? I was just in Kent and talked to people who have an incredibly low image of the value and human value of students and others who are involved in dissent. Why do you think this is the case, and does it contribute to the likelihood that something tragic occurs to students?
Okay. What's going on the campuses is very confusing to me, and I'm there. You know, I try to understand, but only because I'm living in the middle of it. Now, imagine that you're sitting in a small town in America, and all you see is what the media presents as what's going on the campuses. And I understand your problem that, nobody wants to see a picture of a car driving down the street and not getting hit. That's not news. But so when a building blows up, you people pick up on that, all right? So you're sitting in this small town and you see, okay, college students rampage throughout the country, blow up buildings, kill so-and-so, take over a building. Now, you kind of don't understand why they'd be doing this, so you're kind of puzzled. You don't think they're all bad because your kid's in college, and he's our boy and he may be a little mixed up, but he's okay. So then you're watching later on in the news and you see our national leaders, and I'm sure you understand this better than anybody on the commission, getting up and saying, why those getting up and saying why those kids are being stirred up by outside agitators and they're, snotty-nosed, ungrateful people. They don't know what's going on. Let's kick them out. Now, what do you expect them to do? And I really, in a sense, it's too bad that people look to other people to form their opinions about things that they don't understand rather than finding out firsthand. But when you have somebody like the vice president, who isn't, I think he's number 3 now. Maybe he doesn't try quite as hard, but he tries harder. But he's number 3 now, and he shapes opinions. And when you have people like that who have no intention of trying to understand or bring people together, then it's only logical that people hate college students. It's sad, but it's very logical.
Steve Kelman is an outspoken young socialist with an admitted old-fashioned dedication to social justice and democracy. His main worries about students, college and university students in particular, is that they're the new idle rich, playing at the glamorous but dangerous game of inciting social action by violence. His conclusion is that the self-determined needs of this new elite group don't reflect or even consider the needs of the masses.
As a democratic socialist, I believe that the majority of the American people feel personally the evils of a capitalist economy. In the forms, for example, of inflationary pricing by large oligopolistic corporations, of unplanned cities, of deteriorating housing, of intolerable unemployment, of a tax system shot full of monstrous loopholes. I believe that changes in American society will come about because the average American, the so-called silent majority, if you will, feels that changes are necessary. But the idealism of students does not extend to concern over the problems of the ordinary citizen. Instead, most students take a snobbish, arrogant, and elitist attitude towards the American man on the street. The student movement thus has a heavy responsibility to clean its own house. Snobism and arrogance must be replaced by a genuine idealism and a genuine compassion for the American people. Students must begin to address themselves not only to the romantic problems of racism, poverty, and war, but also to the mundane problems of inflation, taxes, and unemployment. And immediately, unconditionally, and completely, students must reject those of their fellow students who affirm totalitarian regimentation, one-party regimes, and so-called revolutionary police states. The Young People's Socialist League, of which I am the national president, has urged and will continue to urge that the student movement clean its own house. But for the student movement to do so, it needs encouragement, both in word and in deed, from the adult community.
Mr. Kelman, I noticed in your statement that you put the issues or the problems of racism, poverty, and the war in the category of the romantic, and problems such as inflation, taxes, and unemployment in the category of the mundane. Certainly to a vast segment of students with whom I deal, racism would be considered a very fundamental, mundane kind of problem. How do you make the distinction?
I meant it simply in terms of what it seems exciting. To students who have experience with none of these problems, who have direct experience with neither the problems of racism, nor poverty, nor inflation, nor unemployment. Now, the students who are just deciding what issues they feel an idealistic concern about. Students who don't have experience in any of these problems, who are acting in an idealistic way of concern for other people's problems. Those problems which seem the most exciting or the most action-filled, the most sort of where it's at type problems, are the problems of poverty, racism, and war. And it could be very well because they're the most serious. I think they are the most serious in the sense of affecting the people they affect the most seriously. All I'm saying is, by mundane problems, I mean sort of normal problems that affect so-called middle America, the so-called silent majority, which are problems to these people, to the silent majority, and which may not be as dramatic and obvious to the student as other problems which are more dramatic and apparent, but which nevertheless are important and which the student has very, very little sympathy with. What I'm saying is not that students are too idealistic, but they're not idealistic enough, that their sympathy and compassion extends to a certain range of problems, but it stops at a certain definite point. This idealism suddenly becomes transformed into an attitude of contempt. In other words, let me take an example. One of the big criticisms that a student would make of, let's say, the average American, the man on the street, is that he spends all his time watching television, that doesn't read books and things like that. Now, I think if you go in the ghetto, let's say, I think you'll find that most people, this is no criticism of either the average American or of the ghetto, spend a lot of time watching television and don't read books. Yet the fact that people in the ghetto do not spend time watching television, do not read books, does not lead the average student to have contempt for the resident of the ghetto. But the fact that Joe Auto Worker from Hamtramck, Michigan, goes home from the auto plant and watches television and doesn't spend his time reading books, leads the average student to say, oh, this disgusting slob. So all I'm saying is the compassion and sympathy among students is too selective, and that it should be extended.
Kelman went on to say that because of the current polarization on the campus, middle-of-the-road students, fence-sitters as he calls them, are forced into taking a radical position on either side of the political spectrum. And the tragedy, he claims, is that many of them find themselves in this radicalized position without really believing in or even knowing the cause for which they're fighting. Kelman said continuing this polarization is one of the most serious problems facing any attempts to bring back order to the campuses, and he had some ideas on how to do it.
First, in words and ideas, an ideological counteroffensive must be launched in terms that young people can relate to against the anti-democratic, totalitarian ideologies which are growing up on the campus. Generally, government spokesmen have spoken either in terms of vague concepts of freedom or indulged in flag-waving rhetoric, which may appeal to the older generation, but which leave young people cold. Young people must be told, in no uncertain terms, what communist dictatorship implies for them. I read recently about young Cubans who were imprisoned by the Castro dictatorship for the crime of defiling posters of Che Guevara. I didn't read about this in a speech by a government official or in the mass media, but in Dissent, a democratic socialist magazine with a circulation of under 10,000. Similarly, the fate of youth behind the Iron Curtain, where all political and cultural strivings are ruthlessly suppressed, remains largely an untold tale. Second, if we are to undertake an ideological counteroffensive in support of democratic values, our actions must correspond to our words. American support for the military dictatorship in Greece, just to cite one example, is hardly consistent with our role as the most powerful defender of democracy in the world. Similarly, all anti-civil libertarian measures by government, even if allegedly undertaken to defend ourselves against supposed subversives, must be vigorously resisted. I think particularly here of FBI political dossiers on individuals who dissent, or harassment of groups such as the Black Panthers. Third, those on campus who break the law should be treated as other citizens who break laws are treated, through fair trials in our courts. Students should not be exempt from the law, but neither should they be given what is in effect pre-trial punishment. I'm referring here to police brutality in cleaning out campus buildings, for example. Finally, the response should be commensurate with the danger. American society faces serious problems, of which one, but certainly not the most serious, is campus violence. Statements from the Vice President indicating that the antics of what are admittedly a bunch of hooligans threaten the future of the Republic are hardly helpful. Nor, to say the least, is the presence of National Guardsmen with loaded rifles on a campus. Perhaps if we see the problem of campus violence in a proper perspective, we will have more time to devote to solving other of our nation's social ills.
A witness on yesterday suggested that the problem with students on campus is that they're bored, and that they ought to be kept out of school between high school and college for a few years, and then, well, he suggested the age 22 that they would go back. Do you find any credence in such a statement?
It's a good proposal. I think it's a good idea. I think it's important, though, to say that there are certainly students on campus who are bored. But I think you have to draw a distinction, I talk about it in my book to some length, between political radicals and cultural radicals. And I think the political radicals, people in SDS and so forth, and I think my testimony made clear, have absolutely no brief for their political views, but I don't think they've adopted them because they're bored or because, you know, for some sort of psychological reason like that. I think they've come to these views for various reasons, which are too lengthy to go into here. But, you know, they're not bored. They're busily working on various things, and they're intelligent kids who are not bored. I think there's a separate group on campus who could be called either cultural radicals or sometimes the hippies that sort of overlap with this group, who are not really that political, but who do go into these demonstrations just for kicks and for, you know, because it's the action cool thing to do. And I think these people themselves would admit, if you ask them, they are bored and they are seeking something new to do. And these people provide a lot of the cannon fodder sort of for a lot of demonstrations, but I don't think they provide the leadership, or I don't think they don't ask to set the policy or set the ideology. There's very interesting, in fact, there's a big tension between the cultural radicals and the political radicals on the campus. During the Harvard strike in April '69, the cultural radicals had staged during one of the rallies, you know, in Harvard Yard, a big concert performance by some rock groups. And, you know, kids were dancing in the yard. It was really fun, really cool, they all said. And the political radicals, the SDS, got so hysterically mad over this. They said it was detracting from the seriousness of the struggle. And at one point, one of them got so angry that he said if this goes on any longer, he was going to break the music equipment. It was really, they reacted with a Puritanism that would do, I don't know, some hard-laced, 60-year-olds proud. And they were absolutely incensed and horrified that these cultural radicals were interfering with the seriousness of this revolutionary confrontation by doing something so evil as to play rock and roll music. And in fact, also during the Harvard strike,
when they occupied University Hall, the event that was the direct cause of the confrontation, the first thing they did was voted not to allow kids to smoke marijuana inside University Hall because it would detract from the seriousness of the political discussions going on. And this got some people very angry, some cultural radicals.
Let me ask you another question. You indicated that violence does not accomplish anything, and certainly there are many persons who share that thought with you. But several students have indicated that this is their only means for attracting attention. This is their only means for being heard. What is your explanation for your view now as opposed to the views that were all about you when you were an undergraduate student at Harvard?
Yeah, I think that this is simply untrue, that it's the only way that people can get heard. I think that if people want to get heard, they certainly have to speak up, and I think frequently they have to demonstrate and so forth. But I would ask any student to compare the success of the various revolutionary activities and violent activities which he has undertaken with, let's say, the success of the boycott, nonviolent boycott undertaken by the grape workers in California. This has been completely without violence, and it's been a campaign that's finally leading to some success. I think that you can't just sort of sit on your behind and do nothing. Then you're not going to be heard. You have to speak up, and frequently you have to demonstrate to get attention. But I don't think you have to either coerce other people or engage in physical violence or engage in anti-civil libertarian activities of the type that students have been engaged in. I think certainly you have to make your voice heard, and I'm all for doing that. But I think that it's simply untrue that violence has worked better than a determined, nonviolent struggle. And let me add a postscript to that. One person can blow up a building. It doesn't take majority support or even anything, approaching majority support to blow up a building. It can be done in the stealth of night and so forth. I think one of the advantages of nonviolent mass protest is that it shows you have some support behind you. In other words, just that some person on campus has decided that he has a solution to the world's problems doesn't give him a divine right to have these solutions followed by either the government leaders or by the people or whatever. And therefore, if he says, I spoke and I was not listened to, and that doesn't really strike any weight, frankly, in my book. I think it begins to strike weight if he has support from significant sections of the population. And I think that he can show that support by determined nonviolent action and protest, including electoral action.
Take it that as president of YPSL, you travel around the country and see universities other than the one you attended. So it's fair to ask some general questions about your observations on the university. You began, I think, by arguing that American universities are very, very free, and one might say in response that this may be true of the elite institutions on the East Coast, but it may be less true in general. What has your observation been on that?
It's certainly, many universities are less free than the so-called elite universities, Ivy League and so forth. I think the least free universities are sort of small private schools, which I visited very few of. I think that the large public universities in the country at this present time, in the year 1970, are by and large rather free institutions. I don't think they're completely free, or there are no problems in this regard. But it seems to me that the fact that even at public institutions, let's say, in Illinois or Indiana or in the Midwest, that university buildings or university space is provided free for students to hold meetings to plan the destruction of the university. With not only the buildings being provided free, the lighting being provided free, janitorial help being provided free, and these are meetings whose open purpose is to plan various attacks against the universities in question. Now it seems to me that this is this strikes me as an example of an institution which is quite free. Similarly, on most of the large institutions in the country,
the drug laws are by and large not really enforced. There's a great deal of freedom in this regard. In most of the large institutions in the country, the parietal rules, rules when you can have girls in your room, have by and large, in most of the public institutions, been by and large abolished. In fact, Harvard was one of the slowest ones in abolishing them.
Despite their mile-wide ideological differences, Kelman and Miss Jefferson did agree on a few things. They both charged Vice President Agnew with helping to polarize the students with his continuing verbal attacks on some groups of young people. And they both said that American society had to change and become more responsible and responsive, although they pinned the major responsibility for action on different groups, Kelman on the students, Miss Jefferson on the establishment. And there was one other area of agreement.
You see is there anything that you could recommend to this commission whereby we may have some influence or impact in helping us not to arrive at a point of no return?
Yeah, I think this is really far beyond the realm of student unrest, but since, as I argued earlier, the problem of the campus unrest, and as a lot of other witnesses have said, cannot be solved on the campus alone. If you can make recommendations about national policy outside of the particular realm of students, I would strongly suggest that the government has to follow policies for dealing with the problems of the cities that, one, are going to cost a lot of money, but that, two, are going to be aimed, in order that they get popular support, not just, although of course they have to be aimed at the poor in our society, and particularly black people in our society, but also policies that are aimed at helping the needs of the silent majority at the same time. In other words, so that the auto worker or the steel worker doesn't think that the black man or the poor people are gaining at his expense, but rather that the working class and poor people, working and poor people of our country are advancing together. And I think particularly the way that, a practical way which this can be done is through the creation of government job programs in the public sector, in construction of things which are needed by the society as a whole. In other words, if we put the poor and the unemployed to work building mass transit, building hospitals, building housing, this at the same time aids the stock of these goods for our people as a whole, works to tear down the ghettos, and provides employment for our unemployed people. As I think that we're going to have to begin to think in terms of solutions to social problems which are not aimed just at a minority group, but which are aimed at the majority of the people, and which therefore have more of a chance of being supported by the majority of the people. Now, that has nothing to do with students, but I think it will help overcome the polarization in society. I think that's what the game is becoming about.
Is the depth of alienation and disaffection so great that we have passed the point of no return?
No, because, see, as long as one college campus can open in the fall, you've not passed the point of no return. And I really don't mean that to be flippant,
Yes,
but there are a lot of people...
No, that's a very good answer.
Yes, okay. I understand. Thank you very much.
One establishment group that has played and will continue to play a major role in keeping the cool on the campuses is the local police department. Used badly, police have turned relatively quiet student gatherings into riots. Used properly, they've prevented property damage and probably saved lives. Washington, D.C.'s police have an enviable record in maintaining order while still letting the First Amendment do its work. The man most responsible for this is District of Columbia Police Chief Jerry Wilson. Probably the highest praise Wilson ever received came from a hippie during a demonstration who said, "He's very definitely a non-neurotic pig." This is a typical demonstration in Washington. Big, generally well-behaved, but with an ever-present possibility of violence by hardcore activists. And these are the police, working under what Wilson calls command and control, close supervision, and applying what he terms minimum force, but firmly. Chief Wilson has men specially trained in crowd control, trained to put down trouble before it starts. He was asked by the commission to comment on the use of firearms in controlling campus disorders.
It depends. I'm not certain that there's any magic way to handle a disorder, to be quite honest. I think
you know, if you have a crowd that you want to disperse, tear gas will do this without doing permanent damage to anyone. Arrests tend to be controlling, tend to stop crowds. One of the things that we're experimenting with here is the identification of specific troublemakers at the scene of disorders and obtaining warrants for their arrest later. As I related, this really arose during the demonstrations at Ward Circle during May, in which the first day or two there were students, obviously, or apparently students from American University who were out leafletting. They would get in the street some, but when they were told that they had to get out of the street, they would get out of the street. But by about the third day, we began to see in the crowd individuals that we had seen at other demonstrations away from American University. And in the later days of the problems there, we began photographing these individuals and seeking warrants for their arrest. This was toward the end of the demonstration, and whether that was the factor that stopped it or the fact that the students themselves, I think, made a great deal of effort not to lend any presence support to the trouble. But in any event, it did dissipate. I believe, though, that arrest of troublemakers is a useful device. There are a wide variety of options open short of the use of firearms.
Could I still another? I apologize. Chief Wilson, what do you think about the ethics or the wisdom of infiltrating student groups with police officers in disguise?
Well, we do that. So we do that for a variety of reasons. One principal thing that a police agency must do if it's going to successfully cope with disorder is to gather useful intelligence about what's going to happen, and this is not possible to do without doing some infiltration. And infiltration obviously is not the most ethical undertaking in the world. Any of the undercover aspects of police work obviously are somewhat unethical. But it's a matter of what is practical. We found it necessary, for example, to infiltrate our high schools in recent years because of the increasing hard dope traffic in the high schools, and there's just no way to address these problems without infiltration. We have much the same problem in universities, that you can't deal, for example, with narcotics traffic without placing undercover personnel, and indeed you can't really effectively deal with demonstrations without knowing what, at least reasonably, what is going to happen, and you can't know this without infiltration. So while I will admit that an undercover operative is in a somewhat questionable position as it regards ethics, it's a necessary evil.
Shorty. Chief, in several areas, or in many of the metropolitan areas where the police are not quite so well endowed in terms of finances such as you have been, the cities have found it possible to secure additional funds for their police departments, and those who've taken a look at this situation have found out that they have used most of these funds to buy hardware. That is what's known in Jackson, Mississippi as the Thompson tank, and in other areas large vehicles bristling with guns and that sort of thing. Do you feel that funds could be directed or should be directed in securing of additional hardware, or are there training programs or other remedies to assist in the control of disorders that would be much better for all concerned?
Well, I don't think you can really do it as an either-or situation. Of course, one of the factors involving a decision as to whether you buy hardware, and we don't own any tanks, although we do have an armored truck, which is simply a protective device rather than an armed truck. But when you make a decision as to whether you buy hardware or engage in training, you sort of make an option in what costs, you know. I don't really know what an armored tank would cost, but probably $10,000, let us say. And really an effective training program, when you start talking in terms of the cost of the manpower to attend training programs, gets up towards, on the same order of $100,000 and $150,000. Hardware is a lot cheaper, is what I'm saying, than training or manpower. I don't personally recommend nor advocate a great deal of purchase of hardware. I think that agencies have to consider what they need and make a determination as to what types of equipment they need. There is equipment that is necessary if you're going to deal with disorders. You must, for example, if you talk about hardware, if you're talking about buying helmets for your men, you almost have to do this. You have to buy gas masks. These things all come under the category of hardware. I'm not aware really of anyone who owns any tanks. I suppose, I know there were some placed on the market back in '67 and '68, but I don't personally know of anyone who bought any. Now, this isn't to say that there were none, but I don't think there's any wide proliferation of that type of hardware.
But police action is only effective when a potentially dangerous situation exists. Dr. Robert Rankin, today's fourth and last witness, is more interested in preventing confrontation at the source. Dr. Rankin, a former minister and chaplain, is vice president of the Danforth Foundation of St. Louis, Missouri, a group specializing in the support of research projects in education and urban affairs. A commissioner asked him if he would agree with Steve Kellman's statement that American universities are extraordinarily free institutions.
I agree with that up till the present time. The factors which have been introduced into American life during this last year, however, raise a severe question in my mind about the truth of that in the future.
Yes, and how do you control violence that may occur there without causing more problems along that line?
Yes, that is your question, and I wish you well in the pursuit of it.
We would appreciate very much anything you would like to send us to help us, sir, and we are very grateful for what you have presented to us today. May I also say that knowing something about the Danforth Foundation, we would be very grateful for any information in the way of research or anything else that you have that you could forward on to us that could be helpful to us in our deliberations. Joe, you had a question?
I think that you perhaps said it, but maybe I can put it more succinctly. Two of the students who have appeared before us, one yesterday, one today, stated very frankly that they were reluctant to appear because they feared that this commission would merely become like the other commissions, and that the report would be put on somebody's shelf, and that no matter what they said, it wouldn't have very much relevance or significance. And then you indicate that this commission does have within its power the ability to make recommendations that could be meaningful. But if we are, and I submit that we may be less prestigious than the other commissions, how do we get our voices heard? And of course inherent in that is the constant refrain from students that they can't get their voices heard.
Well, you have, if I understand your process well enough, it seems to me you have made a splendid beginning. You are trying admirably to listen to a wide variety of views. For example, Mr. Hayakawa yesterday and Mr. Rankin today represent somewhat different views, and the student representatives, etc. It seems to me that what you must try to grapple with is all of these factors and come up with that combination of political strategy plus coping with the facts of the case moving toward Justice Holmes' simplicity on the other side of complexity, to reach simplicities, yes, but ones which are products of all of the struggle and all of the conflicts you have heard, and do your best submitting to the President terms so persuasive and so powerful that they cannot be escaped. The stakes, I submit, are very great.
Yes, sir. Joe.
Sir, in your own judgment, how much time do we have? How are things running out? How long can we sustain this state of tension and crisis that you describe? This sudden change in our character that you describe. How long? How much time do we have? Or in your own judgment, I know it's...
It's an exceedingly complex question, but a fair one. One which, Mr. Rhodes, I should not try to speculate about. I have moments of deep fears that unless some new exciting challenge occurs within our society, unless we are able to avert further depressing aspects in our foreign policy, that yes, it might be possible for the crisis to continue into new heights. At the same time, I must report to you my own sense of confidence in the quality of youth. This is a result of many visits in universities and colleges in the United States, which continue to give me hope. When I read the newspaper, Mr. Rhodes, I despair. When I visit the campuses and talk with the students, I have a sense of hope. There is a reservoir of leadership and of faith here which may be large enough to avert catastrophe. I devoutly hope so.
After 2 days of hearings, a few things have become increasingly clear. The commissioners are earnestly trying to understand and analyze issues that don't readily lend themselves to intellectual understanding or analysis. They're emotional issues that touch us all in different ways and that mean different things to us all. The students who have testified have consistently lamented about the difficulty of communication and their lack of belief that their words would go beyond room 1202. And that may be a legitimate concern. It certainly has a basis in fact in the action taken on prior commission reports. But the men on the dais are trying, and if the love and concern and charity that are such a large part of the young people's rhetoric is real, perhaps they can spare a bit of it here and show some of it toward the men they're talking to, and more importantly to the American people whose support they need and should have. This is David Prowett in Washington. Good night.
This was a production of National Educational Television. Distribution of the preceding program was a service of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The program normally scheduled at this time will not be seen in order that we may bring you the following special broadcast.
Violence on campus the same as you can in city streets. We feel that deadly force should only be used as a last emergency. And I think a guy should have the right of protection of his life or the lives of others.
In a special one-hour broadcast, NET presents Crisis on the Campus. Highlights of the third day's hearings of the President's Commission on Campus Unrest. Now, NET correspondent David Prowett.
The National Guard had a chance to explain, argue, and defend its position today as the President's Commission on Campus Unrest held its third day of public hearings. All three types of response were needed as the head of the Federal National Guard Bureau came under fire in the toughest questioning of a commission witness to date. The National Guard actions in Ohio with Kent State University, where 4 students died, at the University of Wisconsin, and in scores of other confrontations have been seriously criticized by both students government officials, and citizens groups. This concern over the use of the Guard in campus violence was reflected in testimony from Senator Edward Kennedy the first day of the hearings.
The general survey now being undertaken by my Senate Subcommittee on Administrative Practice and Procedures, it appears to me that the National Guard at Kent State was in direct violation of the standards set forth in the Army Field Manual under which all National Guardsmen are trained. If those standards had been followed in the past, Kent State could not have happened. If those standards are followed in the future, no more Kent States can happen.
The man who this morning had to answer this and other prior criticism of the Guard is Major General Winston P. Wilson, Chief of the Pentagon's National Guard Bureau. During his statement, he claimed that the National Guard has had more experience with civil disorders than any other law enforcement body other than local and state police agencies. From January of 1968 to May of 1970, he said, the Guard had been called up 324 times for this purpose. During the height of campus unrest last May, National Guardsmen were used on 24 occasions at 21 universities in 16 states. He also defended the men who had done this work and said the people do not appreciate the difficult task of the Guard.
Withstood the verbal abuse of angry mobs. They have suffered the indignity of many other forms of abuse. I can guarantee you indeed that these men would not wish a similar experience on anyone. I might add that from my experience in watching them and in my reviews of their actions on hundreds of occasions, the single most outstanding impression I get is that they're patient men, professional in action, and brave in the face of real danger, and concerned with the protection of the rights of all citizens. Riot control, civil disturbance operation, or whatever one chooses to call it, is one of the most distasteful, thankless, and dangerous missions the National Guard has. It should not be forgotten that when the Guard has been called out, a serious emergency exists. By the time we're called, lives and property already are in jeopardy. It's a dangerous situation. If the confrontation was not threatening to expand beyond the capabilities of the state law enforcement agencies, calling upon the Guard by the governor would not be necessary. I dread to think what might have happened if the Guard had not been available to the states in some of these cases. You must remember that Guardsmen are civilian soldiers and airmen who have been summoned reluctantly from their homes and from their jobs in obedience to duty. The dangers they face on duty are real. This rock, gentlemen, I'm holding in my hand was one that landed among police and guardsmen at Berkeley. It weighs 4 pounds, and it was propelled into the formation by a homemade slingshot. Pictures are here in the front. Some other devices we have, and the police have faced up to, and these disturbances also are on display here.
General, in view of the fact that it appears that a number of the federal guidelines have been violated by National Guard units, do you have any recommendations on how they could be more strictly enforced or what changes could be made in them?
Commissioner Ahern, I'm not sure that I could say, because I have not run an investigation on the guidelines in Ohio. This is being run by the other agencies. The only thing I can say is that in the hundreds of times that we have had people on disturbance duty, which is around the country, that the rules that we've had seem to work. And I would not want to comment on the not following the rules of the 19-15 and because of the investigation and so forth that's going on, sir.
Well, let me rephrase that, and I'll say that I did say that it appeared that they were violated. Do you have any specific recommendations for change in federal guidelines for the use of National Guard troops?
No, sir. As you know, the Guard is trained under the standards that are prescribed by the active Army. We can constantly work with the Army based on after-action reports to improve all of our plans and the training methods. Now, we did change our training standards after the riots in Detroit and completely reviewed them. We have changed some of our standards in the training of the Guard on the refresher training and other things to better improve it. We can always improve, there's no question. Chief Ahern, that we can, and we try our best to get the best training that we can to make our people more responsive to the needs of the states.
Wilson admitted there were no standardized federal guidelines for the conduct of National Guardsmen. Each state makes its own code, and each governor is the commander-in-chief of his own private army. It's not until the Guard is federalized, a rare occurrence, that the national government takes over. So, to all intents and purposes, unless the law is changed, the federal government has no control over the state Guard units except as an advisory and administrative coordinator. Whatever praise or blame is due the organization must be laid at the governor's door in each individual state. General Wilson testified that he had personally reviewed the state's riot control plans in 1967 after the Detroit disturbances. Then he quoted from the current Guard manual on when lethal force, that's guns, could be used.
The manual was clarified to read, quote, 3 circumstances must exist before deadly force can be authorized, unquote. The 3 circumstances, and I quote again, are 1, lesser means have been exhausted or are unavailable. 2, the risk of death or serious bodily harm to any innocent person is not increased by its use. The purpose of its use is one of more of the following: self-defense to avoid death or serious bodily harm, prevention of a crime which involves a substantial risk of death or serious bodily harm, for example, to prevent sniping, prevention of the destruction of public utilities or similar property vital to public health or safety, detention or prevention of escape of persons against whom use of deadly force is authorized in subparagraph A, B, C, immediately above, unquote.
Should there be a general rule that, other than selected marksmen to confront sniper fire, guardsmen should not carry loaded weapons on campuses when brought there to quell civil disturbances?
Mr. Burns, I believe that the situation has got to depend. We can have violence on campus the same as you can in city streets. We feel that deadly force should only be used as a last emergency. And I think a guy should have the right of protection of his life or the lives of others, sir.
I think the question is, who should use it, General? Should there be selected individuals that can adequately confront sniper fire, or should every guardsman have a loaded weapon?
Normally, we have in the states, when we have snipers, known snipers, they have what they call sniper teams who are equipped, who are trained, and so forth that are used there. This doesn't preclude if a man is about to lose his life of protection to himself as an individual. I would say that normally you fire upon orders.
Chief of Police Wilson yesterday testified that it was the practice of his department that when officers were called to a campus in the District of Columbia, that they would not go on the campus armed, and that if they were confronted with sniper fire, special marksmen would be called in to handle that situation. Would you agree with that policy used by guardsmen?
We agree that sniper fire should be handled by people that are capable and trained for that type of person, sir.
Would you agree that the other guardsmen on the campus at the time would not be armed?
No, sir. I would think that there'd have to be the flexibility there to determine what the situation required. And this is a judgment factor that's got to be made at the time that the people are called in there, sir.
Would the live ammunition be chambered at that time?
Could be, but it probably would not, sir.
Thank you. General, you stated that 47 of the states conformed with the Army plan of engagement. Was Ohio one of those states?
Yes, sir.
Could you, General, describe what the Army plan of engagement prescribes as the appropriate method for chambering shells?
I have with me, sir, a summary of the special orders on the Department of Army orders that go to each individual, as well as a summary of the special orders in the Ohio plan. To that extent, I will cover, since you asked about the fire, I'll cover that one point. I'll be glad to make this whole thing available to the committee if you'd like to study it.
I think that'd be very useful. Yes. General, I think what I'm interested in is just if you could briefly describe the prescribed rules that you've set forth for the use of loaded weapons for civil disorders.
Under the DA plan, it says, I will not load or fire my weapon except when authorized by an officer in person, when authorized in advance of an officer under certain specified condition, or when required to save my life. I'm reading from the Department from Ohio Plan Special Orders. I will not load my weapon except when authorized. I will fire when required to save my life or when returning fire.
From the information that you've received, was there an order given at Ohio for the weapons to be loaded?
I understand they were, sir.
Was there an order given at Ohio for the weapons to be fired at Kent?
I do not know that, sir.
General Wilson, do you have any evidence that since the deaths at Kent State, that the procedures or orders or training of the National Guard in Ohio has changed in any way whatsoever?
I have received no changes in their plans. As you know, at the present time, the legislature is investigating the action at Kent State. The grand jury is investigating that. The Department of Justice is investigating that along with the FBI. And anything I give you would be personally hearsay, and I don't think that I should get into that.
Is there anything that you would personally recommend in light of things that you know in Ohio?
We have furnished to the states, Ohio as well as the other states, the Army's plan for 19-15 and certain changes that have been made to that, as I referred to in my statement. And I feel that all the states, including Ohio, will follow those changes.
Do you think, General, that the actions of an individual guardsman on a campus during a disturbance is to any extent affected by the national climate established by our national leadership in depicting students in various ways?
I do not.
Thank you.
Student violence is the focus of the Commission inquiry. Its history on the campus and the specter of its recurrence next fall is the ever-present pressure working on the 9 men on the dais, the President, and the country. But their involvement, for the most part, is intellectual. Others have been and will be on the firing line. One of these is Harvard University President Nathan Pusey, who interrupted a vacation to come to Washington and testify. Dr. Pusey got his baptism of student fire in 1969 when his campus was literally taken over by 300 militant students. At that time, Pusey called in the police to restore order. This act precipitated a university-wide strike and much criticism of the president of the nation's oldest university.
Do you have any misgiving, second thoughts, or regrets about the consequences of your requesting the use of police on Harvard's campus in April '69, and the subsequent deterioration of the community of Harvard and the role that played in it, if any role? Do you have any regrets, or would you have done it another way, or your response to that whole sequence of events? I mean, how do you feel about that now in retrospect?
Well, I don't know if that's strictly relevant, but I'm perfectly willing to respond to that. If people, I have said to student audiences many times in Cambridge that if we were back exactly in that situation at that time, I would do it that way again. I have also said I hope to God we would never be in such a situation, and I don't think that we're apt to be. I've said that at that moment in time, one had to make a guess as to whether or not calling the police in would shorten the period of disruption and get us back to our normal procedures more rapidly than the other way around. This is the kind of an experiment which can never be conducted. There's just no way of knowing. I still believe that that was true. We thought about 2,000 people would follow what I think the stereotype response is, to say police awful people, everything was bad therefore, and scream. But I thought out of 15,000 students, most of them would see that the issue was not the police, it was the behavior of these students in University Hall. And when you think that 13 or 14,000 of them were not thrown off balance, I think that shows that there was a good deal of reason. Now, I know that many of those thousands, since that time, have come to think it would have been better not to do it. I don't know what the evidence for that is.
The remainder of today's hearings were given over to 3 university presidents, whose constituency runs from Dr. Pusey's prestigious Ivy League school to a Midwestern teachers' university and a black Southern school. All 3 institutions have suffered from some form of campus violence. All 3 used police force to quell the disturbance. All 3 are worried about a possible recurrence of violence next fall. Despite their history of disagreement with students, all 3 men are convinced that young people do have a role to play in the operation of a university. But the extent of that role is a question, and the fact that if students are going to participate, they also must assume a new responsibility. Dr. Pusey.
I have, as I've said on other occasions, or this view of the world as something that's contaminated and made that way by older people in earlier generations, leads in the next step to a disrespect and even a hostility toward history and tradition and things that happened before. The past is clearly evil because it's created this abhorrent way of life, and the need, therefore, is to get liberated from the past, which inhibits, and get on to the future, and change is the thing that frees people. Well, now that view and the view of older people just don't jibe, and I think that the basic root of the tension is right there, and I don't know that there's going to be an easy answer to it. Now, I think a further part of the explanation, something must be kept in mind, is this, that all of us, young and old, have forgotten that young people are young. The young people have forgotten it because they're so terribly serious and earnest, and they feel that they are called upon to set all these evils right. That is, they're called on to assume a responsibility for which it's perfectly clear they could not possibly have had adequate preparation nor have had the experience to qualify them to discharge that responsibility. And we have forgotten they're young because we somehow inclined to think that they may have found some fresh insights that see the problem more correctly than we do, that there is some kind of revelation that's come to them that other generations have, of which other generations have been deprived. And then here I have to qualify that because we forget that these people are young at a time that is peculiarly difficult for anyone to work his way through and to understand. More difficult, I think, than the situations that many earlier generations have had to cope with. I think we must make perfectly clear, scrupulously clear, that dissent and the expression of dissent must be accepted on university communities. But the faculty especially have a responsibility to try to help young people and members of their own bodies to understand what is implied in academic freedom, how we develop the concept, how we won this great good, with what great difficulty, what a precarious achievement it is, and how easily destroyed. Its great importance for learning and scholarship and for the advance of civilization. And then the faculties must learn, too, that not all of their members really share this faith, that there are now in faculties people who are willing to spend academic freedom as an outmoded concept, something that's part of this restricting past that gets in the way of emancipation and freedom, that it's a concept that has outlived its usefulness. Instead, I think of being, seems to me, the very essence of the academic life and learning. Well, I don't know what we'll do with the people who would like to use the university as an instrument to promote revolution, but there are such people, few in number fortunately, but they're there, and faculties will have to recognize that and find ways, in their own ways, of coping and restraining their influence. I said we have to establish an exciting, attractive learning. This certainly is part of it. And then I think we have also to get a little clearer about where the word democracy is applicable and where it isn't, and to have more respect for knowledge and for informed opinion than has been demonstrated in recent years on campuses commonly. That is, the young people have the idea that if you get 1,000 or 5,000 or 6,000 people together and they all want something, that then this is necessarily right and good. I've used the old story again and again to try to illustrate this point about the children in the nursery school, and they have a rabbit, and the question is, what's the rabbit's sex? And they talk about how they could resolve this, and finally the little girl says, let's vote. Well, now that idea has been so widespread so long, and we have to come again to see that knowledge is relevant, exact information, respect for evidence, ability to reason correctly, to try to at any rate. All these things have to be reestablished. How we cope with the worldwide feeling of frustration and anxiety and fear is much too big a problem for anybody to cope with. It seems to me that there will have to be some kind of new infusion of spirit in society. I don't know where that's going to come from, nor do you. Certainly the young people are right in saying they don't want any phony kinds of spirit or pretense here. This has to be the genuine thing. And in time that'll have to be given, and I guess we'll have to wait till it is. Well, that's as much as I want to say, and I'll respond now to your questions.
Well, it's a good deal, and we appreciate it, sir, and particularly in view of the fact that we've interrupted your regular procedure this summer, and know that there are few, if any, people in the country that's had more experience with this problem. And also, may I make a personal comment? I'm grateful that you followed the charge that has been made to us, because, quite frankly, this is obviously what we must do, and there have been, although we've had very fine witnesses, there's been relatively little of that. Are there questions of Dr. Pusey? Yes, Jim?
Doctor, a good deal of the testimony that's been given to the Commission has dealt with student dissatisfaction with the present structure and organization of universities. Do you feel that the students should participate in the governance of the university, and I mean in the decision-making process, more than they do presently? And if you do, could you explain to the Commission how that could be accomplished?
Well, in the general answer, yes or no, I suppose, the answer is yes, but here again it takes lots of qualification. You'd have to look at a specific campus and a specific situation, and there's so great differences among them that you can't answer this just that easily. I would say it's very important not to confuse the roles of the governing boards, of the faculties, and of the students. I think that you can't just put these together in some kind of mush. They have different responsibilities and different roles to play, and that must be understood and kept distinct. With that qualification, then I think the more association, communication, participation there is, the better. And I think most places are now finding ways where students can participate and where they have this kind of informed knowledge I'm talking about, and their insights can be of enormous value. But just to think because a person is young, that he therefore should be on the governing board of an institution, I think is sheer nonsense.
Yes, General.
Doctor, we've had at least two witnesses who've indicated the desirability of a change in the years that would be an individual would follow in attaining an education. One witness indicated, I believe, that it would be good to have a national service type operation in which a student would, upon finishing high school, would spend some time perhaps to age 22 before he went to a college or to a university. Another individual, a witness, talked about Antioch College, where apparently students go to school for one quarter, they work for another quarter, and then they go back to school. This, I think, in an effort to combat a spirit of boredom and frustration, which they found to be existent on college campuses. Do you foresee the desirability of big changes in the system of education that's currently we're following here in the United States?
Well, here comes an example of my equivocation. I think I would object to the notion that there can be any single right way of structuring this. There are so many different kinds of young people, and what we need is a variety of pathways for them. There is a brilliant young fellow at the age of 14 or 15 that's brilliant enough to come on to a university and should go right straight on through to his PhD without any interruption at all. And there are many other people that don't fit that, most of them don't fit that category. I think that before we got involved in these difficulties because of the draft and all in recent years, we had found that many young people were dropping out midway in the college career and doing something else and coming back afterwards. And almost every case of that kind that I had an opportunity to observe, it was a good thing. It was a wise decision, and the effect was noticeably good. The person had been going through a desultory kind of performance, not knowing just why he was there, went out, and then when he comes back a year or 2 years later with more experience and some sense of how this does relate to the world outside, then they begin to run true. And I would hope that we can have possibilities for people to come in and out of the system at different stages. But I wouldn't want, if we could avoid, I hope we can avoid just some one single regimented way of saying everybody must go to college.
You figure that the draft has had some effect in keeping students in college that don't really want to be there very much and has added to whatever boredom there seems to be in universities?
Well, a few years ago, I, on several occasions, said that I did not think this was a serious factor. I must say I've changed my opinion on that. I think the evidence is that it has had the effect of keeping quite a number of people in college and universities and graduate schools who otherwise would have gone out, had different kinds of experiences, and that's part of our problem.
Excuse this question, it sounds much too crude. Is there such a thing as intellectual irresponsibility?
Well, I guess the answer to that is there surely is.
Does it exist on university faculty?
Well, perhaps let's say it's pretty general in scattered around in human beings.
That's right. How can it be minimized?
I don't know. I really don't know. That this comes to a basic ethical concern at one point, but more than that, I think there has to be a new sense of excitement in learning. And the great teacher feels this himself, and it's just so vivid by his activity that the other student catches it and feels that's right and proper. Now, all of us in our time had such teachers and felt them. It's very difficult for that kind of teacher. It's been difficult these years for him to keep his confidence because the world seems to be moving in a different direction. And this kind of person is not terribly sympathetic to diverting the interest of the university to the outside world, to solving all the problems of the cities and that kind of thing. One has to find a balance through here. You need both kinds of teachers. I just wish the good Lord would produce thousands more of these inspiring teachers for our campuses, and that would finally solve this problem. But I don't know where we're going to get.
Clarification I'm looking for. In your comments about how do we maintain academic freedom, you made, I gathered, some emphasis that this you felt was something that the faculty could especially take more activity upon. Are you saying that in terms of both problems that might occur with academic freedom, either the desire to politicize the university or possibly outside or inside repression? Is this why you think the faculty should have more responsibility and push in this effort to preserve it?
In both of those instances, I think the faculty has to take more responsibility. There are members of the faculty now who definitely want to politicize the university, and they think the university is not doing its job unless it's leading the revolution or the restructuring of society and so on. And these people see the statements made by people like myself and others regarding academic freedom as some kind of a device to frustrate progress and stuff, and would not concede that it is a sincere belief that all sorts of views should be tolerated. They don't think that. And they've gotten themselves in a state of mind where there is a right way now. And if you don't believe that or don't see that, you're stupid. And if you see it, you've got to get on with it. And that leads very quickly to this place where they become very intolerant of others. And that's showing up on campuses. There is a right way of looking at each problem. And the fellow who doesn't see it that way is suspect. And that's why I think they have to get clear in their own minds what a mistaken notion this is, and get young people to see it.
Harold Sponberg has been president of Eastern Michigan University since 1965. The school has a student body of about 19,000. In the spring of 1970, the school underwent 5 days of severe confrontations in the wake of our Cambodian invasion and Kent State. There was severe property damage, and about 170 students were arrested. Dr. Sponberg was asked about how he handled this last problem.
Have you got any advice for us or for other colleges or universities in actual occasions?
Well, in our situation, we carried on endless dialogue, endless conversation, endless discussion of the issues at hand, which were pretty much within the university. Dealt with participation on the governing board, dealt with the non-renewal of some contracts for some individual profs, and some general concerns about involvement in campus decision-making, such as advisory committee to all departments and so forth, which has been going on for some time. It hasn't been 100%, but this is an operational development to which the administration has addressed itself over a period of time to move toward this involvement, and yet having the responsibility of the academic leadership to indicate the quality of the program that is being offered. Shared discussion and later conclusions or decisions to be made out of that discussion has been the process we've been trying to work toward. Sometimes, however, the dialogue is terminated by some of the people who either do not want to have the demands fully met or they do not want to see any progress being made. And I think that, speaking as a president, the boundlessness of the patience of myself and others is a very important element in this whole matter, and how the Commission can prescribe that as a suggested goal and objective to be attained as a result of your findings. I'd have to share with Dr. Pusey the fact we need to revitalize the whole teacher learning continuum and to make the knowledge live. Whether this will satisfy all of the students or not, I don't know, because I'm highly conscious of the impact of the external issues of the day as they affect the thinking and feelings of the students. And it makes the task, of course, very difficult. But the comments I made here in the conclusions are some elements of our university support that develop or create the environment for tension. And it is with great regret that some of those support allocations were reduced so much in this year that it hinders our program, especially for the culturally and economically deprived students, to move forward, because our enrollment in education today in our type of school continues rising. It does not level off as some universities have. We expect 3 more years of significant growth, and then there will probably be some decline. And so I'm hedging a little bit on what can be done, but the internal governance of the university can certainly be improved, and has to be, in order to get this involvement. But I'm not so naive, Mr. Chairman, as to think that because that involvement does occur across the campus in great frequency will necessarily minimize the thrust of some individual people, both on and off campus.
Emphasized that some of the campus tension, unrest, and violence will remain regardless of what the establishment does. He blames this on the actions of a hardcore group that's committed to destroying our society. He added that no amount of reason or change short of destruction will satisfy this group, if they don't see it happening any other way. One of his statements and largest worries is that this indoctrination in the necessity for violence is taking place now in colleges, high schools, and junior high schools.
Mona, you referred to those who you feel are trying to destroy our society. And you said the indoctrination is taking place in colleges, high schools, and junior high schools. Who is responsible for this indoctrination?
I would say that it is individuals who are connected with revolutionary movements who come into the schools, and I'm speaking in a rather specific sense because I have a son in elementary school and a daughter in junior high school and a son in the university and I've also moved out into the field to high school commencements and other workshops with students, and these are individuals who want to develop the philosophy of tearing down the country and not being supportive of what we consider is a dynamic democracy or republic we know as the country.
Are these the faculty members in these various levels of teaching?
No, these are basically non-students. They're people who hang around the edges of campuses who don't go to any school and who are revolutionary type non-students who fan and feed our own students in support.
Would you also say a word about the political activities of universities and their faculties? How do you feel about the politicizing of the university, and where, if anywhere, are the limits on political activities of university staffs and teachers?
Well, I would start out with the premise that the professor ought to teach that subject and to that group as he was employed or the department determines he shall do. As far as political activities outside the campus, he is free to do that as he would be, as any other citizen would be. If we find that professors are not using the classroom for the purpose of teaching the courses that were designed, I think the university has an obligation to correct that so that it does represent integrity of the courses that are offered. As I answered Mr. Scranton, I don't want you to conclude that the course should not be renovated, revised over a period of time and have dynamic curricular change. Your physics courses today aren't the same as they were 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But I think the integrity of the classroom is the matter that concerns me, and if it's used as a forum to politicize or radicalize the university or the students, I think that's wrong.
Doctor, I refer to your response to Dr. Cannon's question in which you mentioned the revolutionary non-students who are engaged in indoctrination exercises in high schools, junior high schools. Do you have any idea who supports the financially the revolutionary non-student types?
No, I don't.
Jim? Doctor, would you care to identify any groups?
SDS, YSA, and I'm speaking from my experience with them, who are quite active in our area, and while we have a very small group of students so motivated on our campus, the assist that we receive from off-campus people is very significant. But now I don't want you to draw the conclusion, Mr. Mayhearn, that this absolves our own student leadership from exercising a judgment and action that will contribute to the well-being of the university. But it's a fact.
The third college president to speak today is the president of a relatively small southern black school that has had a large amount of trouble. In May of 1967, before Dr. Sawyer became president, one policeman died and 2 other police officers and a student were injured by snipers as the police were leaving the campus after a small confrontation. An hour later, 600 police arrived back at the school and started shooting after the students resumed demonstrating. Since Dr. Sawyer came to the school, there have been some tense moments, but no more violence. The question is, how did he do it?
Doctor, about 2 years ago, you had on your campus a confrontation between the police and some of your students that resulted in shots being fired, arrests being made. However, thereafter, and particularly last spring, when the rest of the campuses around the country were facing some turmoil, you did not have any serious events on your campus. Could you describe for the Commission the events of 2 years ago, what steps you took after those events, and in your opinion, why you did not have similar events in the last spring?
Well, immediately upon arrival on the campus on July 11th, 1968, we engaged faculty, students, staff members, alumni, community leaders in some dialogue away from the campus. We went on a retreat for about 2.5 days. And what we were really concerned with was how can we move the program of the university to the point where the student, the learner, with his particular requirements beyond his intellectual needs he can be the center, and we can subordinate our particular special interest with the hope of bringing some relief to the problems that bothered him. I think a sincere and honest attempt was made there, and more than delineating any particular devices or procedures, I think what we got across was the fact that we are indeed interested in you as the center of the university. Now, from that point, we began to alter procedures, alter practices in line with the learning requirements, which I again insist are substantial, so that the student was genuinely convinced that we were sincere in our efforts to do something about how he felt. Now, this has been our posture since July 11th. Now, I think this, perhaps in the main, is responsible for our not having any serious disruption. But I would be very quick to add that there's a strong element of luck in this whole business, because one thing happening on another campus can have a special attraction to a group of considerable influence on your own campus. And just because the box score doesn't include us today, we might have to do something to get in there tomorrow.
Did you change anything with relation to the local police, discussions that you're having with the local police?
I don't know that it represented a change, but I went to the leadership of the community in front days after I got aboard, and we had some frank discussions about the university and what we were hopeful of in terms of university community relations, and we agreed upon some minimum things that we would observe. And we have observed those. There's been good faith on both sides, and this has contributed unquestionably to the stability of the situation.
At an informal news conference at the conclusion of the day's hearings, it was announced that additional ones would be held in Washington next Thursday and Friday, and in Jackson, Mississippi, and at Kent State University on later dates. The afternoon news conference was called in answer to many press requests for the Commission itself to evaluate its work thus far. Commission reports, notably the Kerner Commission and the commission headed by Milton Eisenhower, which covered violence in the United States fairly extensively. There has been very little action on those reports. Do you have any reason to believe that there will be any more action or any swifter action on your report?
Let me make two comments, part of which are not an answer to your question, but are background to it. First of all, with regard to the Eisenhower and the Kerner and other good reports that have come out, I don't think they have been as ineffective as some people say they have been. For example, with regard to the Eisenhower one, I've noticed quite a change in television programming. Likewise, with regard to the Kerner report, I think it at least was effective in giving blacks in this country a better hope by telling it like it is, that there was some realization in this country that it is like that, which they may not have thought had been the case before from a commission of that standing. Secondly, and this does pertain directly to us, both of those reports, as you will remember, were addressed to the public at large and special parts of it to special groups. It was therefore very easy to not follow them if you did not wish to, because when X doesn't follow his part of it, then Y says, well, why should I do mine? Ours will be different in that respect. They will be directed to the President of the United States, giving him information which we believe and actions and recommendations that he can do in this national crisis, so that it would be literally in his lap. We think this is important because, first of all, this is a national crisis. It is not occurring on every campus in the country, and it is not even occurring in every community where there is a university. But it has occurred enough in enough places so that it is national in scope. And we have been asked to present to him a report. We think it's important that since he is the national leader in a national crisis, that this should be addressed in that way. And it will be done, unless the Commission changes its mind, that way.
Witness after witness has suggested to this Commission that it might turn out to be a placebo, that it might do more harm than good if, one, its report is not hard-hitting, and two, the recommendations are not implemented. Do you have any personal fear on that score in either direction?
Not fear, concern. I am concerned. I have had no indication from the administration that they are going to ignore the report. It would be very serious if they did. I would agree with that description of our possibilities.
Would you like to see the report confine itself to things that you commissioners think could be done? Or will you make recommendations? Would you like to see recommendations that perhaps are not practical from the standpoint of being implemented immediately?
No, I think we have to make very practical, specific recommendations, and the Commission has decided to make recommendations to the President specifically, and I think what we recommend to him must be practical and concrete.
What if you said end the war, as Senator Kennedy suggested?
Well, that's not necessarily impractical, but that's a judgment, that has to be made.
Mr. Chairman, are you disappointed at all after the last 3 days in the fact that no real recommendations have been forthcoming from the witnesses?
Yes, I'm disappointed to a degree. I would like to have seen more specific recommendations. Said so, incidentally, in a couple of questions, but not especially surprised because, after all, each individual witness was asked to present his thinking about our particular charge and was not aware of what anybody else might say. So there was obviously some repetition, which happens in all open hearings of this sort. I was, however, very happy about how much they addressed their testimony to the problem and didn't get off into extraneous rhetoric.
Could you pick out some areas of testimony that you found particularly helpful, and perhaps some of the other members of the commission too?
Members, you want to, I answered this question 2 or 3 times yesterday. Maybe the rest of you would like to.
Can we direct it to Ms. Durtek?
I think the most worthwhile information that we've received at this point has been from students and from college administrators. Probably the least worthwhile has been from those areas of officialdom that have testified.
Anybody else got an answer to gentleman's question?
Could we ask Ms. Durtek to answer that question?
Well, I would agree with Chief Ahern that the testimony from the students has been of particular interest. I would hope that soon we will have testimony from faculty, too. That strikes me as an omission so far.
Chief Ahern, could you expand on that a little bit, sir? Why did you feel that testimony from officials was not worthwhile, and what could have been brought out that was not from these sources, sir?
I think there's been a reluctance or a defensiveness on the part of people that represent bureaucracies or institutions to level with the commission. I think they've been vague in their answers, have been almost shifty to the point that the questions were not responded to at all.
Chief, are you specifically including or referring to the testimony this morning by the Chief of the National Guard Bureau? Did that especially affect you?
I would include him in it too, yes.
The role of the media in instances of campus violence was a subject for discussion both at the hearings and at this afternoon's news conference, where it was suggested that perhaps newsmen might also be called on to testify. What specifically happens next on the campus is, of course, the main reason for the hearings. And today, both President Pusey of Harvard and President Sawyer of Texas Southern were asked if they anticipate a worsening of the crisis on the campus this fall. First, President Pusey.
I'm sure we're going to have them, but just what they'll be, I don't know. We took or at least I and some of my close associates decided that we wouldn't, in these recent weeks, sit down and try to get in our own minds too precise as to just what the problems were going to be, because we thought the longer one delayed towards September, the more accurate one's predictions would be. Clearly, the question of the election and all that, which looms so terribly large, will recur and lead to lots of discussion and conceivably to frustrations and activities, I don't know. And anything can happen out of this Vietnamese situation at any moment. That's just not going to go away in a hurry.
I think our students at the moment can best be characterized as hopeful, but with a realistic degree of pessimism. Very little has happened in this country since the outbreak on our several campuses, I think back in '66, to really get at the heart of the problem, as I have attempted to summarize in here. Very little. I think if we would take a factor of, let's say, 2 to 1, in terms of the provision of resources for program development, if it were 2 to 1 in 1966, I think it would be perhaps 6 to 2, or even greater, because the compensatory support has not come. And these very fundamental programmatic issues that I have raised continue. And ending 3 days of concentrated discussions among administrators at our university. And this is directly related to your question about prospects for the fall. I wish I could be very hopeful, but as I see it, we're in for a really tough year.
It was another day of almost never-never-land testimony at the third session of the commission. The dreamlike quality came from the calm, measured tones of the adult witnesses, completely lacking in the urgency shown by the students. It was almost as though the so-called generation gap had walked into the hearing room and been put on exhibit. At some point, both groups are going to have to make their trip through the looking glass and make contact with reality. We can only hope the hearings will help. This is David Prowett in Washington. Good night.
This concludes our coverage of this series of hearings of the Presidential Commission on Campus Unrest. Crisis on the Campus was a production of National Educational Television.
This is NET, the Public Television Network.
Nationwide distribution of the preceding program is a service of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.